Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There is a sound that no one ever forgets. It is not the crack of a bolter, or the shriek of a las beam cutting air, or even the distant rumble of orbital bombardment shaking a world to its bones. It is something deeper than all of these. Something that comes from below the threshold of hearing, and rises through the soles of your boots, up through your legs, into your chest, until your ribs vibrate with it, and your teeth ache, and your heart stutters because for one terrible, beautiful moment, your body believes it is standing inside something alive. That is the sound of a footfall, one single footfall of an Imperator-class Titan. And when you hear it, when you feel the earth buckle and the air compress, and the sky itself seem to flinch, where you understand something about the Imperium of man that no amount of scripture or propaganda could ever teach you. You understand that humanity did not survive 40,000 years of endless war through faith alone. It survived because somewhere, on some ancient forge world lit by the fires of creation, human hands and machine minds built something so vast, so impossibly powerful, that even the gods of chaos might look upon it and feel, if only for a fleeting second, something close to doubt. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere very few souls in the entire galaxy will ever go. Not to a battlefield, though we will visit those before we are done. Not to the bridge of a warship, or the throne room of some planetary governor. Tonight, I want to take you inside. Inside the largest walking war machine ever constructed by the hand of man. Inside a cathedral that moves. Inside a fortress that breathes. Inside the body of a god made from iron and adamantium and 10,000 years of unbroken fury. Tonight, we go inside the Imperator-class Titan. Now, before we step through those massive blast doors and begin our journey from the armored feet all the way up to the spires of that impossible cathedral perched on its shoulders, I want you to understand something. The Imperator is not simply a bigger version of the Warlord, or a scaled-up Reaver with extra guns bolted onto its frame. It is a fundamentally different kind of thing. The Warhound is a scout, nimble and aggressive, hunting in packs across the flanks of a battle line. The Reaver is a shock trooper, a brawler, were built to crash into enemy formations and break them apart with brute force. The Warlord is a walking fortress, yes, the backbone of any Titan legion, a towering engine of destruction that can dominate an entire theater of war. But the Imperator? The Imperator is a world unto itself. It is a mobile command center, a temple, a barracks, an ammunition depot, a cathedral, and a weapon of mass destruction all wrapped into one titanic humanoid shell that stands somewhere between 43 and 140 meters tall, depending on which source you trust and which pattern you are looking at, because frankly, the Imperium has never been particularly consistent about these things, and that is part of its charm. The Adeptus Mechanicus measures things in their own inscrutable ways, and the common soldier just knows that when the shadow of an Imperator falls over them, they are standing in the presence of the machine god made manifest. Let us begin where all journeys begin. At the bottom. The feat of an Imperator Titan are, in themselves, feats of engineering so complex that entire teams of tech priests dedicate their lives to maintaining them alone. Each foot is a platform the size of a hab block, a compressed mass of hydraulic actuators, shock absorbers, stabilization gyros, and structural supports designed to bear the unfathomable weight of everything above them. When an Imperator takes a step, the force that travels down through its leg and into its foot is measured not in tons, but in kilotons. The ground does not simply compress beneath it, it shatters. Roadways crack apart like dry clay. As rockcrete foundations buckle and fold, on softer ground, each footfall leaves a crater deep enough to swallow an armored personnel carrier whole. And the legs themselves are not mere structural pillars holding the body aloft. The legs of an imperator are bastion fortresses in their own right, with crenellated walls and firing platforms built into their structure. Battle cannon batteries are mounted into the leg housings, and soldiers can actually stand on platforms within the legs themselves, pouring fire down into enemy infantry who might be foolish enough to try to approach the Titan from below. Imagine that for a moment. There are soldiers stationed inside the legs of this machine, looking out through armored viewports at a world that shakes with every step their home takes. And they brace themselves against handrails welded to the interior hull as the entire structure lurches forward, and they wait for the order to fire upon whatever scurrying thing dares approach the feet of their god. The structural engineering required to make an imperator walk is, by the standards of the 41st millennium, ancient beyond reckoning. These machines were first designed during the dark age of technology, that golden era when humanity's mastery of science and engineering reached heights that have never since been equaled. The knowledge required to build an imperator from scratch has been largely lost. The Adeptus Mechanicus can maintain them, can repair them, can sometimes even reconstruct damaged sections using patterns and templates preserved in their data vaults. But the idea of building a new one from nothing, so that is a dream that keeps the Magi awake in their amniotic tanks. A prayer whispered to the Omnissiah in the hope that one day the lost knowledge might be recovered. Each imperator is therefore a relic. Not a relic in the way that a bolter once wielded by a hero is a relic, to be placed in a reliquary and venerated from a distance. No, these are working relics. Relics that walk and fight and kill and shake the earth with their fury. Some of them have been in continuous service for 10,000 years or more. 10,000 years. The casus belli of the Legio Metallica, perhaps the most well-documented imperator in all of the lore, has been routing armies and leveling cities for over 10 millennia. It fought in the Great Crusade. It survived the Horus Heresy. It has walked the battlefields of a galaxy at war for longer than many civilizations have existed, and it still walks today. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means to be a crew member aboard a machine that has been alive, if you can call it that, for 10,000 years. The machine spirit within its core has accumulated the memories and battle data of centuries upon centuries of warfare. It has known thousands of princeps, hundreds of thousands of crew. It has felt the heat of plasma reactors pushing to their limits, the shudder of void shields collapsing under enemy fire, the satisfaction, if a machine can feel satisfaction, of watching an enemy titan crumble and fall before its guns. The machine spirit of an imperator is not some simple subroutine humming away in a cogitator bank. It is an intelligence, ancient and vast and deeply, profoundly alien to human understanding, and it is always there, always watching, always waiting, always hungry for the next battle. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let us climb upward, through the legs and into the torso, where the true heart of this living fortress begins to reveal itself. The torso of an Imperator Titan is where the machine transitions from being merely a vehicle of war into something more. Something that could, in a very real sense, be called a city. The interior spaces of the torso are vast, multi-leveled chambers connected by corridors wide enough to drive a chimera through, and in some sections, high enough that a man standing on the lower deck cannot see the ceiling above him without craning his neck back. The air smells of incense and machine oil, yes, of ozone and recycled atmosphere, and the faint, metallic tang of sacred unguents applied to machinery by hands that have been doing so since before the current crew was born. The layout of an Imperator's interior varies, depending on the specific pattern. Mars pattern and Lucius pattern Imperators have different configurations, different emphases, different ways of organizing the incredible amount of infrastructure required to keep a god machine walking. But in broad terms, the interior can be divided into several major zones, each with its own purpose, its own crew, its own culture, and its own dangers. There is the command deck, located in the head of the Titan, where the princeps and the moderati guide the machine into battle through the neural link of the mind impulse unit. There is the cathedral, that extraordinary structure mounted on the Titan's back and shoulders, where the crew worships the Omnissiah, and where the Titan's spiritual needs are attended to with the same seriousness as its mechanical ones. There is the reactor chamber, deep in the Titan's chest, where the plasma reactor burns with the contained fury of a captive sun, feeding power to every system aboard. There are the weapon bays, where the massive arm-mounted primary weapons and the secondary carapace weapons are loaded, maintained, and fired by dedicated gunnery crews. There are the garrison decks, where a full company of soldiers, whether Astra Militarum troops or Adeptus Mechanicus Scitarii, are housed and ready to deploy at a moment's notice. And there are the lower decks, the maintenance levels, and the crawl spaces and service tunnels where the lowest ranked members of the crew, the tributi, the serfs, the menials, spend their lives keeping the god machine functioning through back-breaking manual labor. Each of these zones is its own world, and the people who inhabit them live lives as different from one another as a planetary governor's existence is from that of an underhive ganger. The princeps who commands the Titan from the bridge exists in a state of cybernetic communion with the machine spirit, experiencing reality through a neural interface that makes the boundaries between human and machine dangerously thin. The tributi who works a maintenance shift in the lower decks, tightening bolts and replacing worn cabling with calloused hands, might never in their entire life see the princeps face to face. They exist in different strata of the same organism, separated by rank and function and the cold hierarchies of the Adeptus Mechanicus, yet utterly dependent on one another for survival. This is the reality of life inside an Imperator Titan. It is not simply a question of who sits where or who pulls what lever. It is a question of how hundreds of souls, some of them barely human anymore, some of them more machine than flesh, and some of them ordinary people born on distant worlds and pressed into service through the Mechanicus' system of tithes and tributes, come together to form a single functioning entity capable of destroying armies, leveling cities, and reshaping the geography of entire continents. Let us explore each of these worlds in turn. Let us meet the people who live inside a god. Well, the head of an Imperator Titan is not where you might expect it to be. On most Titans, the head sits proudly atop the body, the highest point of the machine, a crowned helm staring down at the battlefield from a position of supreme authority. But the Imperator is different. Because of the massive cathedral structure that occupies the entire upper portion of the Titan's torso and shoulders, the head is situated lower than usual, hunched forward, almost at the same level as the arm-mounted weapons. It gives the Imperator a posture that some have described as predatory, as though the machine is leaning forward into its own violence, eager to close the distance with whatever enemy dares to stand before it. Inside that head is the command bridge, and it is here that the most important person aboard the entire Titan lives, works, fights, and in many cases slowly dies. The princeps. To understand life inside an Imperator, you must first understand what it means to be a princeps. Because the princeps is not merely the pilot of a Titan in the way that a driver operates a vehicle or a captain commands a ship. The relationship between a princeps and their god machine is something far more intimate, far more dangerous, and far more terrifying than any analogy drawn from conventional military command can capture. A princeps interfaces with the Titan through a device called the Mind Impulse Unit, a piece of technology so ancient and so poorly understood by the modern Adeptus Mechanicus that even the most learned magi can only describe its function in terms that border on religious mysticism. What the Mind Impulse Unit creates a direct neural link between the human brain and the Titan's machine spirit, its artificial intelligence, its consciousness, whatever you want to call the thing that lives inside the iron skull of a god machine. When the link is established, the princeps does not simply see through the Titan's sensors or hear through its Auspex arrays. The princeps becomes the Titan, Their hands become weapon arms. Their skin becomes the thick adamantium hull. Their senses are replaced by powerful scanning arrays that can detect a single human heartbeat at a distance of several kilometers, or resolve the heat signature of an enemy vehicle hidden behind a mountain range. The experience is described in the lore as the manifold, a kind of virtual sensory space where the princeps can comprehend their war engine and their environment simultaneously. In the manifold, the princeps perceives reality as the Titan perceives it, a world of targeting data, threat assessments, power readouts, ammunition counts, and the constant, overwhelming presence of the machine spirit pressing against the borders of their consciousness. The machine spirit of a Titan, particularly one as ancient and powerful as an imperator, is not a passive system waiting to be controlled. It is a ferociously potent entity in its own right, a thing of hunger and rage, and the accumulated battle lust of 10,000 years, and it will fight the princeps for control if it senses weakness. This is why not just anyone can command a Titan. The princeps must be a person of extraordinary willpower, like someone capable of submerging their own identity into the roaring storm of the machine spirit, and emerging on the other side, still recognizably human. The process of becoming a princeps requires extensive cybernetic augmentation. Neural implants are surgically embedded into the back of the neck and skull. Spinal interfaces are installed, running the length of the vertebral column, creating pathways for data to flow between the human nervous system and the Titan's electronic systems. In some cases, especially for the princeps of the largest and most ancient Titans, the augmentation goes even further. The princeps may be entombed in an amniotic tank, their body suspended in a nutrient-rich fluid, their limbs atrophied or even amputated and replaced with augmetic haptic sheaths that serve as additional interface points. Their eyes may be removed, the sense of sight replaced entirely by the Titan's own sensors, the empty eye sockets repurposed as additional connection ports for the mind impulse unit. Imagine that. Imagine voluntarily surrendering your body, your senses, your physical existence, to become one with a machine the size of a building. Imagine floating in warm liquid in a sealed tank, blind and limbless, your entire experience of reality filtered through the electronic senses of a god engine that has been walking the battlefields of the galaxy since before you were born. Imagine feeling the ground shake with each of your steps, not through your feet, because you no longer have feet, but through the pressure sensors in the Titan's massive armored soles. Imagine reaching out to crush an enemy tank, and feeling the resistance of metal crumpling not in your fingers, but in the hydraulic actuators of a power fist the size of a hab block. This is the existence of a princeps. This is what they give up. And here is the terrible, awful, beautiful truth that makes the whole arrangement work. They love it. They become addicted to it. The sensation of being merged with a Titan, of becoming something vast and powerful and nearly invincible, of experiencing the world through senses far beyond anything a human body can provide. This is an experience that imprints itself on the brain with the force of the most potent narcotic. When the link is severed, when the princeps is disconnected from the mind impulse unit and returned to the prison of their own flesh, the withdrawal is savage. Shivers, aching bones, thudding headaches, muscle cramps, or night terrors. And above all, a searing, desperate longing to be reconnected, to once again become the god they were only moments ago. This is why the princeps of an imperator is almost always someone who has already served as the commander of lesser titans, usually warlords or reavers, and has proven their ability to maintain their sanity and their sense of self despite years or decades of neural communion with increasingly powerful machine spirits. The machine spirit of an imperator is incomparably more powerful, more ancient, and more willful than that of any battle titan. It has been alive for millennia. It has tasted the destruction of armies, the leveling of cities, the death of worlds. It remembers battles that the princeps has only read about in history texts. And it will not submit to a weak mind. On the command bridge itself, while the princeps sits, or, more accurately, floats within their command throne or amniotic tank, surrounded by the machinery of the mind impulse unit. The chamber is smaller than you might expect, given the size of the Titan. The head of an imperator is heavily armored, designed to protect the most valuable asset aboard the machine, the mind that controls it. The walls are lined with cogitator banks and monitoring equipment. Cables, thick as a man's arm, snake across the ceiling and floor, carrying data and power between the princeps neural interface and the Titan's systems. The air hums with a constant, subsonic vibration, the sound of the machine spirit breathing, if you can call it that. The princeps does not sit alone on the bridge. Beside them, or more precisely below them and slightly forward, are the moderati. The moderati are the princeps' right hands, their trusted officers, the people who share the burden of controlling a machine too vast and too complex for any single mind to manage alone. The word moderati is plural, the singular being moderatus, and aboard an imperator there are several of them, each responsible for a different aspect of the Titan's operation. The moderati are also linked to the mind impulse unit, though their connection is less deep and less immersive than that of the princeps. Where the princeps experiences the full sensory reality of being the Titan, the moderati access specific subsystems. One moderatus might be responsible for the Titan's navigation and movement, feeding directional commands through the neural link and monitoring the massive gyroscopic stabilizers that keep the machine upright. Another might oversee the sensors, the Auspex arrays and thermal imagers, and long-range scanners that provide the Titan with its situational awareness. Others are assigned to specific weapon systems, their consciousness partially merged with the targeting cogitators and firing mechanisms of the arm-mounted weapons, or the secondary batteries mounted on the carapace. The relationship between a princeps and their moderati is described in the lore as being closer than family. They share a neural link, after all. They experience battle together from inside the same machine, their thoughts and reactions flowing through the same electronic pathways, their consciousness touching at the edges in ways that no ordinary human relationship can replicate. A princeps trusts their moderati with their life, quite literally. How? Because a moderatus who fails in their duty, who freezes at a critical moment or makes a targeting error when enemy fire is incoming, can get everyone on the bridge killed. The story of the Dies Irae, perhaps the most famous Imperator Titan in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore, illustrates this relationship and its potential for tragedy with devastating clarity. The Dies Irae, whose name translates to Day of Wrath in High Gothic, was an Imperator of the Legio Mortis, the Death's Head Legion, assigned to the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet under the command of the War Master Horus himself during the Great Crusade. When the Horus heresy began, the Dies Irae's princeps, Esau Turnet, sided with the War Master, but one of his moderati, Titus Caesar, was a secret member of the Lectitio Divinitatis, the early emperor-worshipping cult, and he tried to stop Turnet from turning the Titan's weapons on the loyal Space Marines at Istvan III. In the end, it was the other moderatus, Jonah Aruken, who betrayed his friend. Aruken's ambition to one day command his own Titan outweighed his loyalty to Caesar, and he shot his fellow moderatus in the back with an auto-pistol, ensuring that the Dies Irae would follow Horus into betrayal. It is a small story, a personal tragedy, played out in the cramped confines of a command bridge while the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance outside. But it tells you everything you need to know about the intensity of the bonds forged between the crew of a Titan and the devastating consequences when those bonds are broken. Aboard an Imperator, the command crew's day, when the Titan is walking and active, is one of sustained concentration and physical strain that would break most ordinary humans. The neural link is exhausting. The human brain was never designed to process the volume of data that floods through the mind impulse unit, and even with cybernetic augmentation, the strain accumulates over time. Chemical stimulants can keep a crew functioning for over 8 days of continuous combat, but by that point, The princeps and moderati are operating in a state of dangerous exhaustion. Their reactions slowed, their judgment impaired, their hold on the machine spirit weakened. And there is another danger, one that is rarely spoken of outside the inner circles of the Collegia Titanica, but that hangs over every princeps like a blade suspended by a fraying thread. Psychostigmatic feedback. When the Titan takes damage, but when enemy fire penetrates its void shields and strikes its armored hull, the princeps feels it, not through any mechanical notification or warning light, but in their body. The neural link is so deep, so intimate, that damage to the Titan registers as pain in the princeps' flesh. A hit to the Titan's torso might manifest as a crushing sensation in the princeps' chest. A wound to the leg might cause the princeps to cry out as phantom agony shoots through their own limbs. In extreme cases, if the Titan suffers catastrophic damage, a reactor breach or an ammunition explosion, or a direct hit to the head, the psychic shock transmitted through the mind impulse unit can kill the princeps outright, their brain simply shutting down as it tries and fails to process the sensation of its body being torn apart. The lucky ones die instantly, while the unlucky ones survive, their minds shattered, reduced to gibbering wrecks by the feedback. Most of the crew's mind impulse unit connections are equipped with manual emergency cutoffs, kill switches that sever the neural link if things go catastrophically wrong. But sometimes, in the chaos of combat, the crew cannot reach those switches quickly enough. Sometimes the feedback comes too fast and too hard, and by the time anyone thinks to pull the plug, the damage is already done. This is the price of being a god. This is what it costs to sit in the command throne of an Imperator Titan and feel the galaxy through its senses. And yet, there is never a shortage of candidates. The addiction is too powerful. The experience is too profound. Once you have been a god, even for a moment, yet you will spend the rest of your life trying to feel that way again. Below the command bridge, deeper into the body of the Titan, the nature of life aboard the Imperator changes dramatically. The rarefied, almost sacred atmosphere of the head gives way to something more industrial, more functional, more human in its messiness and noise and barely controlled chaos. Here, in the upper torso, we find the secondary command stations, the communication arrays, the strategic planning chambers where the Titan's officers can confer with allied forces, and the quarters of the senior crew. The Titan Legion's Grandmaster often uses an Imperator as their mobile headquarters, a fact that adds another layer of authority and activity to the already bustling interior. From within the body of the walking god, as the Grand Master can issue commands to the entire Legion, coordinating the movements of dozens of Titans across a battlefield that might span an entire continent. The communication systems aboard an Imperator are sophisticated enough to maintain contact with orbital assets, ground forces, allied Titan legions, and even astropathic relays in some configurations. The strategic planning chamber, when it is in use, buzzes with the activity of tech priests processing data streams, servitors relaying real-time battlefield updates, and human officers debating tactics in the low, urgent tones of people who know that every decision they make could cost thousands of lives. This is the nerve center of the Titan, the place where the purely martial function of the machine meets the broader strategic reality of whatever campaign it has been deployed to fight. And surrounding it all, woven into the very walls and floors and ceilings like the veins of a living body, are the conduits and cables and data lines that carry the lifeblood of the Imperator, the constant flow of information and power that keeps the god machine walking and fighting and alive. Now let us ascend. Let us leave the command spaces and the strategic planning chambers behind and climb upward, past the armored collar of the torso and onto the shoulders of the god. Because up here, above the head, above the weapons, above everything else, stands the single most extraordinary feature of the Imperator-class Titan. But the feature that makes it unique among all the war machines of the Imperium, the feature that transforms it from a mere weapon of destruction into something sacred, the cathedral. Yes, you heard that correctly. Mounted on the back and shoulders of the Imperator Titan, occupying the entire upper portion of its chassis, is a full-sized, functioning cathedral dedicated to the worship of the Omnissiah, the machine god of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It is not a chapel. It is not a small shrine tucked away in a corner of the hull. It is a Gothic architectural wonder, complete with spired towers that reach toward the sky, stained glass viewing portals that filter the light of alien suns into cascading patterns of color across the interior, flying buttresses, vaulted ceilings, and all the ornate, an overwrought magnificence that the Imperium brings to its sacred spaces. The cathedral sways gently with each of the Titan's steps. That is the first thing that anyone who enters it for the first time notices. The floor is not still. It rocks slowly and rhythmically, like the deck of a great ship riding long ocean swells. The stained glass windows rattle softly in their lead frames. The candles that burn in their sconces, real candles, mind you, not electroluminescent substitutes, flicker and dance with each footfall. The censers that hang from the ceiling on long chains swing in slow arcs, trailing thin streams of sacred incense that smell of myrrh and machine oil, and something else, something that might be ozone, or might be the faint chemical residue of whatever blessed unguent was most recently applied to the Titan's internal systems. The purpose of the cathedral is not merely decorative, though it certainly serves an aesthetic function. In a galaxy where faith and technology are inseparable, where the Adeptus Mechanicus genuinely believes that the machine god inhabits their most sacred creations, the cathedral serves as the spiritual heart of the Titan. It is where the crew comes to worship. It is where the tech priests perform the rituals of maintenance and consecration that they believe are essential to keeping the machine spirit appeased. It is where the Titan's sacred relics are stored. The battle honors, the kill banners, the fragments of older machines that have been incorporated into the Imperator's structure over the millennia. And it is also a weapon. Do not forget that. The cathedral is heavily armed. Gun emplacements are built into its walls and towers, secondary batteries and anti-personnel weapons that can pour fire down upon any enemy foolish enough to approach the Titan from above or behind. The spired towers that look so beautiful from a distance are also observation posts and firing platforms, manned by crew who scan the skies for enemy aircraft and the ground for infantry threats that might try to scale the Titan's body. Life inside the cathedral is unlike life anywhere else aboard the Titan. The atmosphere is contemplative, almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the noise and violence that defines the rest of the machine's interior. The crew who serve here are primarily tech priests and their assistants, adepts of the cult Mechanicus, who have dedicated themselves to the spiritual maintenance of the God Machine. They move through the cathedral's aisles in measured processions, their robes trailing on the gently swaying floor, their augmetic eyes glowing softly in the candlelight as they chant binary prayers and anoint sacred components with holy oils. The stained glass windows deserve special mention because they are not mere decoration. Each window tells a story, depicted in colored glass and lead, of the Titan's history. Great battles are commemorated. Famous princeps are honored. The founding of the Titan Legion to which the machine belongs is depicted in glowing reds and blues and golds, the colors shifting and changing as the light source moves, whether that light comes from the sun of whatever world the Titan is walking upon, or from the distant glow of plasma fire on the battlefield. In the novel Imperator, Wrath of the Omnissiah by Gav Thorpe, which tells the story of the Imperator-class Titan Casus Belli of the Legio Metallica, we are given some of the most detailed descriptions of life aboard an Imperator that exist anywhere in the lore. Thorpe's novel explores the Titan not just as a war machine, but as a living community, a world contained within a walking body, and the cathedral is central to that exploration. Through the eyes of characters like the lowly tributae worker, Gelsa Vingiant, and the Magos Dominus Exarchus, we see how the different layers of the Imperator's society interact, how the sacred and the mundane coexist, and how the constant presence of the machine spirit permeates every aspect of daily life. But faith aboard an Imperator is not a gentle thing. The Adeptus Mechanicus does not practice a religion of comfort and consolation. The cult mechanicus is a creed of devotion through labor, of worship through function, of salvation through the perfection of the machine. The tech priests who tend the cathedral believe, with absolute sincerity, that the Titan is an avatar of the Omnissiah, the machine god, incarnate in a shell of adamantium and ceramite. To serve the Titan is to serve God. To maintain the Titan is an act of prayer. To fail in the maintenance of the Titan, to allow a system to degrade or a component to malfunction through negligence, is not merely an error. It is a sin, and sins have consequences. The rituals performed in the cathedral before battle are elaborate, time-consuming, and completely non-negotiable. No imperator walks to war without the blessing of the Omnissiah, pronounced by the senior tech priests in a ceremony that can take hours to complete. Sacred oils are applied to weapon systems. Binary hymns are broadcast through the Titan's internal Vox network, the eerie, melodic chanting of machine code filling every corridor and chamber with its alien music. The machine spirit is spoken to, not through the mind impulse unit, but through the rituals of the cult mechanicus, ancient rites that the tech priests believe soothe the god engine's temperament and prepare it for the violence to come. There is something deeply compelling about this image. A cathedral swaying atop a walking god, candles flickering, incense drifting, tech priests chanting in binary while the Titan's footsteps shake the earth below. It captures the essential paradox of the Imperium, this fusion of the sacred and the terrible, this marriage of faith and destruction that defines humanity's struggle for survival in the 41st millennium. The cathedral is beautiful. It is also mounted on a weapon that can level cities, and the people who worship inside it see no contradiction in that, because in their understanding of the universe, beauty and destruction are not opposites. They are the same thing, expressed in different forms. Let us descend now, back down through the body of the god, past the command bridge and the crew quarters, past the ammunition storage bays and the secondary weapon systems, down into the deepest, hottest, most dangerous section of the Imperator. The plasma reactor. If the command bridge is the mind of the Titan and the cathedral is its soul, then the plasma reactor is its heart. And like all hearts, it beats with a rhythm that sustains everything around it, a rhythm that, if it ever stops, means death for every living thing inside the machine. The plasma reactor of an Imperator Titan is a nuclear fusion generator of staggering power. It burns with the contained energy of a captive star, producing the incredible quantities of electricity needed to power the Titan's movement systems, its weapons, its void shields, its life support, its communications, its sensor arrays, and every other system that keeps the God machine operational. The reactor does not run on conventional fuel. It feeds on hydrogen plasma, superheated matter contained within magnetic fields of extraordinary precision, and it produces power on a scale that would be sufficient to run an entire city. The reactor chamber is located deep within the Titan's torso, protected by the thickest armor plating the Imperator possesses. It is, by a significant margin, the most dangerous place aboard the machine. The temperatures inside the containment vessel are measured in millions of degrees. The magnetic fields that keep the plasma from touching the walls of the reactor and instantly vaporizing them are maintained by systems so complex and so ancient that the tech priests who tend them follow maintenance protocols that are, in many cases, religious rituals indistinguishable from engineering procedures. They chant sacred verses as they adjust containment field harmonics. They apply blessed oils to cooling conduits. They offer prayers to the machine spirit of the reactor itself, and a sub-spirit of the greater machine spirit that inhabits the Titan as a whole, and they do so with the fervent conviction that these prayers are not symbolic but functional, that the act of worship keeps the reactor operating within safe parameters in ways that purely mechanical maintenance cannot. The tech priests who work in the reactor chamber are among the most senior and most specialized aboard the Titan. They are attended by servitors, lobotomized cyborg constructs hardwired into the reactor's monitoring systems, who provide a constant stream of data on temperature, pressure, containment field strength, fuel levels, and 100 other variables that must be kept within extremely tight tolerances. A reactor that runs too hot risks a containment breach. A reactor that runs too cool will not produce enough power to keep the Titan's systems running. The balance is razor thin, and the consequences of getting it wrong are catastrophic.
Now, I just want to take a quick second here and step outside the lore for a moment, just me talking to you, because honestly, the more I dug into this topic, the more it genuinely blew my mind. I have covered a lot of 40k subjects on this channel at this point, and I thought I had a decent handle on how absurd the scale of this universe gets. But researching the Imperator specifically, reading through the Gav Thor, going through all the source material, it hit different. The idea that there are just regular people living inside this thing, people who eat meals, tell jokes, fall asleep to the sound of plasma reactor humming through the walls, that contrast between the mundane and the godlike is what makes 40k special to me. It's not just the big explosions or the massive battles, it's the tiny human moments happening inside the big explosions. And that's what keeps me coming back to this setting. But anyways, that's just my 2 cents. Let's go back to the video.
A plasma reactor breach aboard an Imperator Titan is one of the most destructive events that can occur on a battlefield. When an Imperator's reactor goes critical, the detonation is described in the lore as being like a white-hot supernova. The explosion is capable of destroying whole regiments of soldiers. It can vaporize units that are standing kilometers away. Vehicles and infantry farther from the blast are picked up and hurled through the air like leaves in a hurricane. The resulting shockwave can shake buildings hundreds of kilometers distant, and the explosion itself is visible from orbit as a sudden, brilliant flash of light on the surface of the world below. This is what the tech priests in the reactor chamber live with every single day. The knowledge that they are standing a few meters of armored bulkhead, away from a force that could, at any moment, destroy everything within a radius of several kilometers. They accept this risk because they believe that the Omnissiah protects them, that their faith and their diligence are all that stand between the reactor and catastrophe. And in a sense, they are right. Not because the Omnissiah is literally holding the containment fields in place, but because the rituals they perform, the maintenance they carry out, the unceasing vigilance they maintain, are genuinely what keeps the reactor functioning. Their faith and their engineering are, in the Imperium, the same thing. And the sound of the reactor is a constant presence throughout the Titan's interior, a low, subsonic hum that you feel more than hear, a vibration in the bones and in the walls and in the air itself. It is the heartbeat of the God Machine, and everyone who lives aboard the Imperator becomes attuned to it in the same way that a child becomes attuned to the rhythm of their mother's breathing. When the reactor increases output, when the Princeps pushes the Titan's systems harder to power weapons or reinforce void shields, the crew feels the change instantly. The hum deepens, the vibration intensifies, the lights might flicker as power is redirected, and in the reactor chamber, the tech priests begin to chant louder, their voices rising in urgent prayer as the containment fields strain against the increased energy, their servitors working faster, as their hands moving over control surfaces with the practiced speed of people who know that the margin between controlled power and uncontrolled annihilation is thinner than a sheet of parchment. Now let us talk about what all of that power is for, because an Imperator Titan does not carry a plasma reactor of this magnitude simply to keep the lights on. It carries it because the weapons mounted on an Imperator require more energy than most warships to operate, and those weapons deserve a discussion all their own. The primary armament of an Imperator-class Titan consists of 2 arm-mounted weapons, each one large enough to be visible from orbit, each one capable of destruction on a scale that most people cannot easily comprehend. The standard configuration, though configurations can vary, most typically includes a Hellstorm cannon and a plasma annihilator. And to understand what life is like inside an Imperator, you need to understand what happens when these weapons fire, because the firing of an Imperator's primary weapons is not a subtle event. It is an experience that involves every person aboard the machine, whether they are on the command bridge or in the lower decks, whether they are manning a gun or scrubbing a corridor. The Hellstorm Cannon is a massive, multi-barreled, directed energy weapon capable of demolishing an entire army in a single salvo. When it fires, the barrels rotate at tremendous speed, the wind generated by their rotation beating fiercely against whatever is nearby, and a torrent of directed energy tears along the enemy line, in cutting through warriors and vehicles alike with no more regard for their presence than a scythe has for individual stalks of wheat. The sound is indescribable. Not a bang, not a roar, but a sustained thunder that seems to come from everywhere at once. A sound that vibrates in the walls and the floor and the very marrow of your bones. The Hellstorm Cannon is so powerful that it has been known to strip the void shields from an enemy Warlord-class Titan in a single volley. Think about that. A Warlord Titan is already one of the most formidable war machines in the galaxy, protected by multiple layers of void shielding, and the Hellstorm Cannon can strip all of that protection away in one burst of fire. The Plasma Annihilator is, if anything, even more terrifying. It is the largest ground-based plasma weapon in the Imperium's arsenal, fed directly from the Titan's monstrously powerful reactor, and when it fires, it unleashes a gout of white-hot energy that explodes upon impact with all the power of a miniature sun. The plasma creates craters hundreds of meters in diameter. It turns sand into glass. The simple act of firing the weapon produces a deafening roar that shatters glass for a kilometer in all directions. Anything caught in the blast radius is not merely destroyed, but returned to its base molecular components, tanks and fortifications, and human bodies reduced to their constituent atoms in a fraction of a second. When the weapons fire, the crew inside the Titan braces. There is no avoiding the physical effects, even deep within the armored interior. The Hellstorm Cannon's discharge sends a shudder through the entire body of the machine. A full-body tremor that makes equipment rattle on shelves and causes unsecured objects to slide across tables. The Plasma Annihilator is worse. The sheer energy required to fire it causes the reactor to spike, the lights dimming momentarily as power is diverted to the weapon, and the recoil, even partially absorbed by the Titan's massive frame, is enough to make the machine rock slightly on its feet. Crew members who are not strapped in or braced against something solid can be thrown off their feet by the concussion, and these are just the primary weapons. An Imperator also mounts up to 6 secondary carapace weapons, which can include turbo laser destructors, Gatling blasters, melter cannons, quake cannons, Vulcan megabolters, and Apocalypse missile launchers. It also carries defensive batteries, point defense weapons, and the aforementioned armaments built into its legs and cathedral structure. The total firepower aboard a single Imperator Titan exceeds that of many Imperial warships, and when all of its weapons fire simultaneously, the effect on the battlefield is nothing short of apocalyptic. The gunnery crews who serve the secondary weapons live in the weapon bays that are distributed throughout the Titan's body. These are cramped, loud, hot spaces filled with the smell of propellant and ozone and the constant clatter of autoloaders cycling fresh ammunition into hungry gun breeches. The crew in these bays work in shifts, but during combat, everyone is on station, everyone is working, everyone is contributing to the sustained barrage of firepower that is the Imperator's reason for existence. The weapon bays are connected to the bridge through dedicated Vox channels and data links, and the Moderati, who oversee the gunnery systems, can direct fire through the Mind Impulse unit, sending targeting data directly to the gun crew's cogitator screens. But for all this firepower, an Imperator does not rely on its weapons alone for protection. It also carries 12 separate void shield generators, each one capital ship grade, each one capable of absorbing incoming fire that would instantly destroy any lesser vehicle. The void shields project invisible barriers of energy around the Titan at a distance of 30 meters or more from its hull, intercepting incoming projectiles, energy beams, and even physical attacks before they can reach the armor beneath. is each shield can absorb a tremendous amount of punishment before it overloads and collapses. But when one shield goes down, the next one takes over, and then the next, creating layers of defense that an enemy must fight through one at a time. In the lore, it is stated that even in a duel with dozens of Warlord and Reaver Titans, the smaller Titan's only realistic hope of penetrating an Imperator's shields is to synchronize their fire perfectly, timing all of their shots to hit at exactly the same point at exactly the same moment, in order to overload a specific section of the shielding. That is how strong the defenses are. An Imperator Titan can stand in the middle of a bombardment that would flatten a city and shrug it off behind its cascading layers of void shielding, its armor untouched, its weapons still firing. Yet its crew going about their business with the calm confidence of people who know they are standing inside something that is, for all practical purposes, invincible. The void shield generators are maintained by their own dedicated crews, tech priests and servitors, who monitor the shield's energy levels and frequency harmonics from control rooms deep within the Titan's torso. When a shield goes down, the crew works frantically to restart it, bleeding off excess energy and reinitializing the generator before the next incoming volley arrives. It is tense, exhausting work, performed under conditions of extreme stress, and the Void Shield crews are among the most highly trained personnel aboard the Titan. There is a detail about the Imperator Titan that I want to linger on, and because it changes the way you think about everything else we have discussed. The Adeptus Mechanicus cannot build new ones. Let that settle in for a moment. The most powerful ground-based weapon system in the Imperium's arsenal, the walking cathedral fortress that can level cities and break the backs of enemy armies, the avatar of the machine god that inspires religious awe in every tech priest who beholds it, cannot be manufactured. The knowledge required to construct an Imperator from raw materials has been lost. It was lost during the Horus Heresy, or perhaps even earlier, during the slow decline of understanding that followed the age of technology. The Mechanicus still possesses the templates and schematics for maintenance and repair. They can replace damaged components. They can rebuild sections of armor. They can even, in some cases, fabricate replacement weapon systems, using patterns that have been preserved in their data vaults for millennia. But the holistic knowledge, the understanding of how to take raw adamantium and ceramite and sacred circuitry and forge them into a complete, functioning Imperator Titan, that knowledge is gone. This means that every Imperator currently walking is a relic from an earlier age, a surviving fragment of a technological capability that the modern Imperium can no longer replicate. The total number of operational Imperators across the entire galaxy is unknown, but it is certainly small. Most Titan legions can field only 3 or 4 in a campaign, and many legions have lost their Imperators entirely and will never replace them. Each one that is destroyed in battle, each one that suffers a reactor breach or a catastrophic structural failure or falls to the corrupting influence of chaos, reduces the Imperium's strategic capability in a way that is, by definition, permanent. This rarity transforms the relationship between the crew and the machine. Aboard most military vehicles, from tanks to warships, there is an understanding that the vehicle is a tool, replaceable, valuable, but ultimately subordinate to the mission and the people who carry it out. Aboard an Imperator, this relationship is inverted. The machine is more valuable than any individual crew member, more valuable, in a strategic sense, than any company of soldiers or any regiment of Skitarii, more valuable, arguably, than any single world in the Imperium's vast domain, because a world lost to the enemy might one day be reconquered. But an Imperator lost in battle is lost forever. This creates an atmosphere aboard the Titan that is unique in the Imperial military. The crew does not serve the machine in the same way that a tank crew serves their vehicle. They serve it in the way that priests serve their temple. Every action they take, from the highest strategic decisions made by the princeps to the most mundane maintenance task performed by the lowliest tributi, is informed by an awareness that they are custodians of something irreplaceable, something sacred, something that existed before they were born and must continue to exist after they are dead. The pressure this creates is immense. A tech priest who makes a mistake in the reactor chamber is not simply risking a mechanical failure. They are risking the destruction of a relic that has been entrusted to their care by 10,000 years of tradition, and the weight of that responsibility can be crushing. But it also creates a sense of pride that is unlike anything else in the Imperium. To serve aboard an Imperator is the highest honor the Collegia Titanica can bestow. The crew are not assigned to Imperators through the normal personnel rotation system. They are selected individually based on their skills, their loyalty, their record of service, and their ability to handle the unique pressures of life inside a walking god. The princeps who commands an Imperator is, by definition, the most experienced and most capable officer in the Titan Legion. The Moderati are the best of their respective specialties. The tech priests are the most learned and the most devout. Even the Tributi, who occupy the lowest rung of the hierarchy, are chosen for their reliability and their endurance because the Mechanicus cannot afford to have careless or undisciplined workers aboard a machine that is literally priceless. This selectivity creates a crew culture that is simultaneously elitist and deeply communal. Everyone aboard the Imperator knows that they are there because they are the best at what they do, and that awareness breeds a quiet confidence that permeates the entire social structure of the machine. There is none of the resentment or class friction that characterizes many imperial institutions. The Tributi do not resent the tech priests because they understand that the tech priests' skills are genuinely essential to the machine's survival. The tech priests do not look down on the Tributi, at least not as much as they might in other contexts, because they understand that the Tributi's labor is equally essential. The hierarchy exists not to enforce dominance, but to organize competence, and that makes it feel less like oppression and more like a natural division of labor. This is not to say that life aboard an Imperator is harmonious. The pressures are too great and the stakes are too high for that. Disagreements occur. Tensions flare. The princeps and the senior tech priests sometimes clash over the best way to balance the Titan's combat needs against its maintenance requirements. The garrison commander and the Magos Dominus sometimes disagree about the best way to defend the Titan against boarding actions. Individual crew members sometimes crack under the strain, succumbing to the constant noise. The claustrophobic environment, the knowledge that they are standing inside a potential reactor bomb, and the peculiar loneliness that comes from living in a mobile fortress that is always, in some fundamental sense, at war. But these conflicts are managed, not suppressed. The social system aboard an Imperator has evolved over millennia of operational experience, and it has developed mechanisms for resolving disputes, addressing grievances, and maintaining morale that are as sophisticated in their own way as the technological systems that keep the Titan walking. The senior crew meet regularly to discuss operational concerns. The tech priests conduct rituals of communion and reconciliation that serve a dual purpose, spiritual and social, bringing the crew together in shared worship while also providing a forum for airing concerns and building consensus. And the Tributi, in their own informal way, look out for each other, forming bonds of mutual support that help them endure the hardships of life on the lower decks. The noosphere is another aspect of life aboard an Imperator that deserves attention. The noosphere is the Adeptus Mechanicus's internal communication network, a wireless data sharing system that allows tech priests and other augmented individuals to exchange information, images, and even emotions through their cybernetic implants. Within the Titan, the noosphere serves as an additional layer of communication, as supplementing the Vox network and the Mind Impulse unit, with a constant background hum of data exchange that keeps the senior crew connected at all times. For the tech priests, the noosphere is a natural extension of their existence. They process data, share observations, and coordinate their activities through the noosphere as easily as unaugmented humans communicate through speech. For the princeps and the moderati, who are also connected to the noosphere through their neural implants, it provides an additional channel of communication that can be used when the mind impulse unit is occupied with the demands of combat operations. And for the tributae, who are not connected to the noosphere and cannot perceive it directly, it is an invisible presence that they can sometimes sense as a faint tingling in their basic cranial implants, and a ghost of the conversation that is happening all around them in a language they cannot understand. The noosphere aboard the casus belli, as described in Thorpe's novel, is a rich and complex environment, layered with information about the Titan's status, the crew's activities, and the ongoing tactical situation. The Magos Dominus Exasus uses the noosphere extensively, communicating with the Titan's tech priests and the princeps through this medium. And the novel gives us a fascinating glimpse of what this experience is like: the constant flow of data, the overlapping conversations, the subtle emotional undercurrents that color the exchange of information between minds that are simultaneously human and machine. Now, there is one more dimension of the Imperator's interior life that I want to explore before we begin our descent back toward the world outside. It is the dimension of sound. Because the soundscape of an Imperator Titan is one of the most distinctive and immersive aspects of living inside one, and it changes dramatically depending on where in the machine you are and what the machine is doing. At the top of the Titan, in the cathedral, the dominant sound is the chanting of the tech priests. Binary hymns, sung in the machine code language of the Adeptus Mechanicus, echo through the vaulted spaces and off the stained glass windows, creating an atmosphere of solemn reverence that is both beautiful and profoundly alien. The chanting is accompanied by the soft tinkle of censers swinging on their chains, and as the creak of ancient wood and the groan of metal expanding and contracting with the Titan's movements, and the ever-present whisper of the wind passing around the cathedral's spires as the Titan walks. In the command bridge, the sound is quieter but more intense. The hum of cogitators and the soft click of data streams being processed, the rhythmic beeping of monitoring equipment, the occasional murmur of a moderatus speaking a command into the vox, and beneath it all, the constant, barely audible pulse of the mind impulse unit, a sound that only the princeps and the moderati can truly hear, the sound of the machine spirit breathing. In the reactor chamber, the sound is overwhelming. The roar of the plasma, contained behind meters of shielding, but still audible as a deep, vibrating drone that you feel in your teeth and your bones. As the hiss of coolant cycling through heat exchangers, the mechanical clatter of servitors performing their endless tasks, the raised voices of tech priests calling out readings and adjusting parameters, their words half lost in the general noise. This is the loudest place aboard the Titan, and the crew who work here wear ear protection, or in many cases, have had their auditory systems replaced with cybernetic equivalents that can filter out the damaging frequencies while still allowing them to hear the voices of their colleagues and the subtle sounds that indicate a system malfunction. In the weapon bays, the soundscape is punctuated by the heavy mechanical rhythm of autoloaders cycling and the metallic ring of ammunition being loaded into magazines. Between firings, the bays are relatively quiet, as filled with the hum of targeting cogitators and the low murmur of gunnery crews conferring over their screens. But when the weapons fire, all conversation stops. The sound is beyond description, a physical force that presses against the eardrums and vibrates in the skull, a sound that the human body interprets not as noise, but as danger, triggering the primal fight or flight response even in veterans who have heard it 1,000 times. And on the lower decks, where the tributae live and work, the soundscape is a constant medley of mechanical noise, the whir of ventilation fans, the clank of pipes expanding and contracting with temperature changes, the distant rumble of the reactor, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of the Titan's footsteps transmitted through the hull. This is the background music of the tributae's existence. And they learn to read it the way a sailor reads the sounds of their ship. A change in the reactor's pitch means the Titan is preparing for combat. A shift in the rhythm of the footsteps means the Titan is changing direction. An unusual vibration in a particular pipe or conduit means something is wrong, and the tributary who notices it will alert the tech priests before the malfunction can escalate into something serious. This soundscape, this ever-present symphony of mechanical noise and human activity, is one of the things that former crew members miss most when they leave the Titan. After years of living inside a machine, the silence of the outside world can be disorienting. The absence of the reactor's hum, the footsteps' rhythm, the constant background noise of a living machine going about its business. Airs creates a void that is almost physical, a silence that presses against the ears and makes the world feel empty and incomplete. Some former crew members never adjust. They spend the rest of their lives seeking out noisy environments, factories and forges and starship engine rooms, places where the mechanical noise is loud enough and constant enough to fill the void left by the Titan they once called home. They are homesick for a god, and nothing in the ordinary world can cure that particular form of longing. Now, we have spent a long time talking about the command crew, the tech priests, and the weapon systems, and rightfully so, because these are the elements that define the Imperator's function as a war machine. But there is another world inside the Titan, one that is rarely discussed, rarely depicted, and rarely celebrated, yet without which the entire machine would grind to a halt within hours of stepping onto a battlefield. The lower decks. Down here, below the reactor chamber, below the weapon bays, below the strategic planning rooms, and the crew quarters, and the cathedral, and all the other spaces where people with rank and authority carry out their duties, there is a maze of corridors and maintenance tunnels and service crawlways that thread through the Titan's body like the capillaries in a living organism. And in this maze, working in conditions that range from merely uncomfortable to genuinely hazardous, lives the largest single population aboard the Imperator. The tributary. The word tributary comes from the Adeptus Mechanicus system of tithes and tributes, the process by which forge worlds and their associated tributary worlds supply the Mechanicus with the human labor it needs to keep its machines running. The tributary are not tech priests. They have not been initiated into the mysteries of the cult Mechanicus. They have not undergone significant cybernetic augmentation, beyond perhaps a basic cranial implant that allows them to receive orders through the Titan's internal Vox network. They are, in the simplest terms, workers, manual laborers, the people who keep the God machine functioning through the application of physical effort, basic tools, and a stubborn refusal to complain about conditions that would make an underhive ganger weep. The tributary come from worlds that owe a labor debt to the forge world that produces and maintains the Titan. They are selected, or more accurately, are conscripted, often at a young age, and transported to the Titan Legion's home base, where they are trained in the basic skills needed to perform their assigned tasks. Some of them were born into families that have served aboard the same Titan for generations. Others are newcomers, taken from distant worlds, thrust into an environment so alien to everything they have ever known that the adjustment period can be measured in years rather than months. Life on the lower decks is hard. The corridors are narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass each other without turning sideways. The air is thick with heat, radiated from the reactor systems above and below, and the ventilation, while functional, is never quite sufficient to make the environment comfortable. The lighting is dim, a permanent twilight of amber and red that saves power for more critical systems and gives the lower decks an atmosphere that is simultaneously claustrophobic and strangely intimate. The constant vibration of the Titan's movement is stronger down here than anywhere else aboard the machine. A rhythmic shaking that new arrivals find disorienting, but which veterans barely notice anymore, their bodies having long since adjusted to the sensation of living inside something that is always in motion. The tributary work in shifts, typically 8 hours on, 8 hours off, though during combat operations the shifts extend to 12 or 16 hours, and in emergencies, the concept of a shift becomes meaningless. Everyone works until the crisis is resolved, or they collapse from exhaustion. Their tasks are unglamorous but essential. They replace worn cabling. They tighten bolts. They clean filters and lubricate joints and carry heavy components through narrow corridors to wherever they are needed. They perform the thousand small maintenance tasks that the tech priests consider beneath their dignity, but that are absolutely necessary to keep the Titan functioning. The tributae do not have private quarters. They sleep in communal berths, rows of narrow bunks stacked 3 high along the walls of dormitory corridors. Their personal possessions limited to what can be stored in a small locker at the foot of their bed. They eat in communal mess halls, where the food is nutritionally adequate but rarely appetizing, synthesized from whatever base materials the Titan's limited food processing systems can produce. They wash in communal ablution blocks, or where the water is recycled and recycled again, always slightly warm, always faintly tasting of the chemicals used to purify it. In the novel, Imperator, Wrath of the Omnissiah, Gav Thorpe gives us our most detailed look at the life of the tributae through the character of Gelsa Vingiant. Gelsa is a wrench jockey, a maintenance worker who spends her days hitting things until they work when the tech priests tell her to. She comes from a tribute world of Metallica, and her life aboard the Casus Belli is one of routine, repetition, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from doing physical labor in a hostile environment day after day after day. But Gelsa's story also reveals something else about life on the lower decks, something that the official records and the technical manuals never mention. The tributae have their own culture, they have their own slang, their own jokes, their own traditions. They drink machine spirits, a type of alcohol that is almost certainly not what the Adeptus Mechanicus means by that term, but which the tributae have adopted with a dark humor that is entirely their own. They play games, they form friendships, they fall in love, or at least into whatever approximation of love is possible, in a world where your home is a corridor inside a walking weapon, and your future is measured not in years but in campaigns. They also, and this is something that the tech priests would find deeply concerning if they ever bothered to pay attention to it, develop their own relationship with the machine spirit of the Titan. Not through the mind impulse unit, which they do not have access to, and not through the rituals of the cult Mechanicus, which they have not been trained in, but through the simple, instinctive bond that forms between any person and the place they call home. The tributae talk to the Titan. They pat the walls when they pass through familiar corridors. They develop an intuitive sense for the machine's moods, knowing from the sound of the reactor hum and the rhythm of the footsteps whether the Titan is calm or agitated, cruising or pushing hard for combat. It is not a formal spiritual practice. It is something much older and much more human than that. It is the same impulse that makes a sailor talk to their ship, or a driver pat the dashboard of a vehicle that has carried them safely through a dangerous journey. This informal, unauthorized relationship with the machine spirit is, as in the context of the Mechanicus's rigid theological hierarchy, borderline heretical. The tech priests believe that only properly trained adepts, using properly sanctified rituals and properly consecrated tools, can interact with a machine spirit without risking corruption or malfunction. The idea that an unaugmented, uninitiated tributae might develop a genuine connection with the god machine's consciousness through nothing more than proximity and emotional attachment would be deeply offensive to many members of the Mechanicus priesthood. And yet, in Thorpe's novel, this unauthorized connection proves to be unexpectedly useful, suggesting that the Mechanicus's understanding of machine spirits may be less complete than they would like to believe. The tributae know things about the Titan that the tech priests do not, because they live in parts of the machine that the tech priests rarely visit, and they pay attention to things that the tech priests consider beneath their notice. When something goes wrong on the lower decks, it is often the tributae who detect it first, not through sophisticated sensor arrays or augmetic senses, but through the simple observation that this pipe sounds different today, or that corridor feels warmer than it should. This is the hidden truth of life inside an Imperator Titan. The machine depends on its princeps and its tech priests and its moderati, yes, absolutely. But it also depends on the hundreds of ordinary human beings who live in its bowels and keep it functioning through sweat and stubbornness. and an instinctive understanding of machinery that no amount of cybernetic augmentation can replace. But below the tributae quarters and maintenance decks, there is another population that calls the Imperator home, one whose presence transforms the Titan from a mere war machine into a mobile military base. The garrison. An Imperator-class Titan can house a complete company of soldiers within its armored body, along with their equipment, their weapons, and their supplies. This garrison can consist of Astra Militarum troops, regular soldiers of the Imperium's vast and expendable military, or it can consist of Scitarii, the cybernetically enhanced soldiers of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who serve as the Titan Legion's ground troops. In some cases, the garrison might even include Space Marines, though this is rare and usually only occurs during the most critical campaigns. The garrison quarters are located in dedicated compartments, or typically in the Titan's legs and lower torso, where there is enough space to house a significant number of troops without interfering with the Titan's primary systems. These quarters are Spartan even by Imperial military standards, which is saying something. The soldiers sleep in racks, eat ration packs, and maintain their equipment in spaces barely large enough to stand upright. But they are aboard an Imperator Titan, and that status confers a certain prestige that makes up for the physical discomfort. The garrison serves two primary functions. The first is defensive. An Imperator is not invincible, despite its awesome power. It has vulnerabilities, particularly to infantry assault. Enemy soldiers who manage to get close enough to the Titan, who slip past the void shields and reach the armored hull itself, can potentially breach the exterior and enter the machine's interior, where they could cause catastrophic damage to critical systems. The garrison exists to prevent this. If the Titan is boarded, if enemy infantry manage to find a way inside, the garrison troops are the ones who meet them in the narrow corridors and maintenance tunnels, fighting a desperate close-quarters battle inside the body of a god, while the god itself continues to wage war on the world outside. The second function of the garrison is offensive. The Imperator can deploy its troops to vital objectives, disgorging them from access points in the legs and lower torso onto the battlefield below. Imagine the scene. An Imperator Titan strides across a battlefield, its weapons blazing, enemy forces scattering before it like insects before a flame. And from the great machine's legs, hatches open and soldiers pour out, 100 warriors or more, dropping to the ground and forming up in the shadow of the god that carried them to war. The psychological impact on the enemy is difficult to overstate. Not only must they contend with the Imperator itself, but they must also deal with a fresh wave of troops deploying from within it. Troops who are motivated and well supplied and fighting with the certain knowledge that a god machine stands behind them, ready to obliterate anything that threatens to overwhelm their position. The Scitarii, who serve as the Titan's guard, are a particularly fascinating group. These are not ordinary soldiers. They are cybernetically enhanced warriors, augmented with implants and prosthetics that make them faster, tougher, and more resistant to pain than any unaugmented human. They are fanatically loyal to the Adeptus Mechanicus, having been conditioned since birth or conversion to place the will of the Omnissiah above all other concerns. Their relationship with the Titan is both professional and spiritual. They guard the God machine not merely because they have been ordered to, but because they believe it is a sacred duty, a form of worship expressed through violence and vigilance. The Secutarii, also known as the Titan Guard, are a specialized infantry force of the Collegia Titanica that accompanies its titans into battle. These warriors are specifically trained and equipped to operate in the unique environment around and inside a titan. A battle space where the ground shakes with every step, where the noise of weapons fire is deafening, and where the void shields can cause disorientation and sensory distortion to anyone caught in their field of effect. The Secutarii are accustomed to all of this. They train in conditions that simulate the chaos of operating in the shadow of a walking god, and they carry weapons specifically designed to complement the Titan's own firepower. Life for the garrison troops aboard an Imperator is defined by waiting. long stretches of inactivity punctuated by moments of extreme violence. The troops train, maintain their equipment, and wait for the order to deploy. Some of them might go weeks or even months without seeing combat, depending on the nature of the campaign. Others might be deployed multiple times in a single day, fighting in the wake of the Titan as it carves a path through enemy territory, and then retreating back into its armored interior when the objective has been secured, only to be deployed again when the next objective comes into range. The noise is a constant companion. Inside the Titan, you are never truly in silence. The reactor hums. The hydraulics whine. The footsteps, those titanic, earth-shaking footsteps, are a drumbeat that marks the passage of every minute of every hour. The weapon systems discharge with a violence that, even muffled by layers of armor and insulation, is loud enough to make conversation impossible. The garrison troops learn to communicate through hand signals and short, shouted phrases during combat, and to treasure the rare moments of relative quiet that come when the Titan is cruising between engagements. The isolation is another factor that defines garrison life, as the troops aboard an Imperator are cut off from the wider war in a way that ground forces never are. They cannot see the battlefield except through small viewports and monitor screens. They know the war is happening because they can feel it, in the shaking of the hull, in the distant crump of weapon fire, in the sudden lurches that mean the Titan has changed direction to engage a new target. But they cannot participate in it directly until they are deployed. And that uncertainty, that helpless waiting while something enormous and violent happens all around you, is a psychological burden that not everyone handles well. Some garrison troops develop a superstitious attachment to the Titan, similar to the tributi's informal relationship with the machine spirit. They give names to the corridors they frequent, and they develop rituals of their own, pre-battle prayers or good luck traditions that have nothing to do with the cult mechanicus, but everything to do with the universal human need to feel some measure of control over an environment that is, in truth, entirely beyond their control. They are passengers inside a god, and gods do not consult their passengers before deciding where to walk. Let us talk now about the broader social structure of the Imperator, because understanding the hierarchy aboard the machine is essential to understanding what daily life actually looks like for the people who live there. At the top of the hierarchy is the Princeps. The Princeps is the undisputed master of the Titan, answerable only to the senior leadership of the Titan Legion and the Adeptus Mechanicus hierarchy. Their word is law aboard the machine, but their decisions in battle are final. The Moderati, the tech priests, the garrison commander, and every other person aboard the Imperator defer to the Princeps in all matters related to the Titan's operation and combat deployment. Below the Princeps are the Moderati, the senior tech priests, and the Magos Dominus, who oversees the Scutarii Guard. These three groups form a kind of secondary command layer, each responsible for their own domain. The Moderati for the Titan's control systems, the tech priests for its maintenance and spiritual well-being, and the Magos Dominus for its physical security. In theory, these three domains are clearly defined and do not overlap. In practice, there is constant negotiation, compromise, and occasional conflict between them, as because the needs of the Titan's control systems do not always align with the requirements of its maintenance schedule, and the security needs of the machine sometimes conflict with both. Below this command layer are the junior tech priests, the servitors, the gunnery crews, the void shield technicians, and the various other specialized personnel who keep the Titan's systems functioning. These people are ranked and organized according to the Mechanicus's own internal hierarchies, which are complex, opaque, and, to an outsider, almost completely incomprehensible. And at the bottom of the hierarchy are the tributi, the workers, the ones who do the dirty jobs, the thankless tasks, the essential maintenance that keeps the god machine walking, but that no one with any status would ever be seen performing. The tributi are not slaves, exactly, but they are not free either. They have been given to the Titan through the tribute system, and they will serve aboard it until they die or are released, whichever comes first. Their labor is the foundation upon which everything else aboard the Imperator rests, and they are, in the grand tradition of the Imperium, almost entirely unappreciated for it. This hierarchy is not merely organizational, it is spatial. The higher your rank, the higher up in the Titan you live. The Princeps occupies the head, the highest and most protected position. The senior command staff live in the upper torso. The tech priests and their workshops occupy the middle levels. And the tributae live at the bottom, in the lower decks and the legs, as far from the Princeps as it is physically possible to be while still being inside the same machine. Well, this vertical stratification creates a social dynamic that mirrors the broader structure of imperial society. The people at the top rarely see the people at the bottom. The Princeps, linked to the mind impulse unit, experiencing reality through the Titan's senses, might not even be aware of the individual tributae who work in the lower decks. The tributae, in turn, might go their entire career without ever laying eyes on the Princeps, knowing them only as a distant, almost mythical figure, whose decisions determine whether the Titan walks or rests, fights or retreats, lives or dies. And yet they are all part of the same organism. They all depend on each other. The Princeps cannot fight without the weapons that the gunnery crews maintain and the ammunition that the tributae carry. Whilst the tech priests cannot keep the reactor running without the servitors who monitor its systems and the tributae who replace worn components. The garrison cannot deploy without the pilots who walk the Titan to the battlefield. Every person aboard the Imperator is a cell in the body of a god, and the god cannot function if any of its cells stop doing their job. This interdependence is the defining reality of life inside an Imperator Titan. It creates bonds of loyalty and obligation that transcend the normal hierarchies of imperial society. A Princeps who fails to take care of their crew, who pushes the Titan too hard, or takes unnecessary risks that endanger the lives of the people inside it, will find that even the most loyal moderatus begins to question their judgment. A tech priest who neglects the lower decks, who allows conditions to deteriorate for the tributae while lavishing attention on the sacred systems in the upper levels, will eventually find that the lower decks begin to malfunction because the people responsible for maintaining them no longer have the energy or the motivation to do so properly. The Imperator, for all its godlike power, is ultimately a human creation, crewed by humans, maintained by humans, commanded by humans, and subject to all the strengths and weaknesses that humanity brings to everything it does. The machine spirit may be ancient and powerful, but it cannot repair its own cooling conduits. The plasma reactor may burn with the fury of a star, but it cannot replace its own fuel cells. The weapons may be capable of leveling cities, but they cannot load their own ammunition. And every act of destruction that the Imperator commits is made possible by the labor and dedication of hundreds of human beings, from the Princeps in the command throne to the tributae in the lowest maintenance tunnel. And without any one of them, the God Machine would be nothing more than an extraordinarily expensive piece of stationary architecture. Now, I want to return to something we touched on earlier and explore it in much greater depth, because I think it is one of the most fascinating and least understood aspects of life inside an Imperator Titan. I want to talk about the manifold. I want to talk about what it actually feels like, moment by moment, to be neurally linked to a God Machine. Because while we discuss the mechanics of the mind impulse unit and the Princeps role in commanding the Titan, we have not yet fully explored the experiential reality of that connection. And it is in that experience that the true horror and the true beauty of serving aboard an Imperator becomes clear. The manifold is the term used by the Collegia Titanica to describe the virtual sensory environment that the Princeps inhabits when linked to the mind impulse unit. It is not a simulation. It is not a heads-up display or a tactical overlay projected onto the Princeps field of vision. It is a complete replacement of reality. When the Princeps enters the manifold, Their human senses shut down. They no longer see through their own eyes. They no longer hear through their own ears. They no longer feel the amniotic fluid surrounding their body or the pressure of the neural connectors against their skull. All of that falls away, replaced by something vast and alien and utterly overwhelming. The first sensation is scale. The princeps suddenly occupies a body that is between 43 and over 100 meters tall, depending on the pattern and the sources you consult. Their feet are armored platforms the size of hab blocks, planted firmly on the earth. Their arms are weapon systems capable of destroying cities. Their torso contains a reactor burning with the energy of a captive star, and they can feel its heat, not as a temperature reading on a display, but as a warmth in their chest, a pulsing vitality that is the closest thing a Titan has to a heartbeat. Their head, where their consciousness is centered in the manifold, sits lower than the cathedral that rises behind and above them, and they can feel the weight of that sacred structure on their shoulders, at the spires reaching upward like fingers grasping at the sky. The sensory input is not human. The Titan does not see invisible light the way a human eye does. Its Auspex arrays detect electromagnetic radiation across a spectrum far wider than human vision, from infrared to ultraviolet and beyond. It sees heat signatures and energy emissions and the magnetic fields generated by running engines and active weapons. It hears not through ears, but through seismic sensors and acoustic arrays that can detect the footfall of a single soldier at a kilometer or the rumble of an enemy tank column at 20. It smells through chemical analyzers that sample the air for traces of propellant, promethium fuel, biological signatures, and the distinctive ozone tang of activated plasma weapons. All of this data floods into the princeps' consciousness through the mind impulse unit, and their brain, augmented by cybernetic implants, but still fundamentally human, must process it and make sense of it. This is where the manifold earns its name. It is a manifold of sensory inputs, a layered, overlapping, constantly updating field of information that the princeps must learn to navigate as instinctively as a normal person navigates the world through their 5 senses. A skilled princeps can shift their focus within the manifold, zooming in on a specific sensor reading or pulling back to take in the full panorama of the battlefield, in the same way that a person can choose to focus on a single conversation in a crowded room or let the general noise wash over them. But the manifold is not just a passive information feed. It is a place of encounter. The machine spirit lives in the manifold, and the machine spirit of an imperator, an intelligence that has been accumulating experience and personality for 10,000 years, is not a quiet roommate. It is a presence, constant and powerful, and sometimes overwhelming, that the princeps must coexist with inside the shared space of the neural link. The machine spirit has moods. It has preferences. It has something that might, with a generous interpretation, be called emotions. When the Titan is walking toward a battle, the machine spirit becomes agitated, its eagerness to engage the enemy manifesting in the manifold as a rising tension, a quickening of the reactor's pulse, a subtle shift in the sensor feeds that makes everything seem sharper and more urgent. When the Titan is in transit, moving between battlefields with no immediate prospect of combat, the machine spirit grows restless, its boredom or frustration expressing itself as minor system glitches, unexplained fluctuations in power output, and a general atmosphere of impatience that the princeps can feel like an itch beneath their skin. The princeps must manage this relationship with constant attention and considerable diplomatic skill. Pushing the machine spirit too hard, demanding more from the Titan's systems than the spirit is willing to give, can result in the spirit fighting back, resisting commands, slowing responses, even temporarily seizing control of individual systems in what the tech priests call a manifestation and what the princeps call an absolute nightmare. Conversely, failing to engage the machine spirit sufficiently, or denying it the combat it craves, can cause the spirit to withdraw, becoming sullen and uncooperative, reducing the Titan's combat effectiveness at the worst possible moment. The bond between princeps and machine spirit deepens over time. An experienced princeps who has served aboard the same Titan for years or decades develops a rapport with the machine spirit that is unlike any other relationship in the Imperium. They learn each other's quirks. They develop shared patterns of behavior, instinctive responses to common tactical situations that flow from mind to machine and back again without conscious thought. In the heat of battle, a princeps and a well-bonded machine spirit can operate in a state of seamless integration that makes the Titan more than the sum of its parts, faster, more accurate, more responsive than even its designers intended. This bond is also what makes the princeps addiction so powerful and so dangerous. The manifold is not just a tool for controlling the Titan. It is an experience of being something greater than human. When you are linked to an imperator, you are a god. You can reach out and crush a building. You can speak with the voice of thunder. You can feel the ground tremble beneath your feet and know that you are the cause of that trembling. You can look across a battlefield and see every enemy, every threat, every opportunity, all at once, with a clarity that no unaugmented human mind could ever achieve. And when the link is severed, when you are returned to your own small, fragile, limited body, the contrast is devastating. Princeps have been known to weep when disconnected from the manifold. They have been known to beg for reconnection, to threaten violence against tech priests who refuse to reactivate the link, to sink into deep depressions that can last for weeks or months. Some princeps never fully leave the manifold at all, choosing to remain permanently linked to their Titan, sacrificing their physical bodies entirely in exchange for an eternal existence as the consciousness at the heart of a god machine. This is the amniotic tank approach taken to its extreme, the princeps becoming not a human who controls a Titan, but a human component of the Titan, as much a part of the machine as the reactor or the weapons or the void shields. The moderati experience a lesser version of this phenomenon. Their link to the mind impulse unit is not as deep or as immersive as the princeps, but it is still profound. A moderatus who oversees the weapon systems, for example, experiences the firing of the Titan's guns not as a remote action observed on a screen, but as a direct extension of their own will. They think about firing, and the weapon fires. They feel the heat of the weapon's discharge. They sense the impact of the shells through the Titan's structural sensors. It is a controlled, focused version of the manifold experience, limited to the specific systems they are responsible for. But it is still enough to create the same addictive pull, the same reluctance to disconnect, the same withdrawal symptoms when the link is severed. This shared experience of the manifold is what creates the extraordinary bond between a Titan's command crew. The princeps and the moderati do not simply work together. They share a consciousness. They touch each other's minds through the medium of the machine spirit, feeling each other's emotions and reactions in real time, developing an intuitive understanding of each other's thoughts and intentions that makes verbal communication almost unnecessary during combat. A good princeps can sense when a moderatus is about to fire a weapon before the order is given. A good moderatus can feel the princeps' intention to change direction before the thought has fully formed. They become, for the duration of the link, a single organism distributed across multiple human brains, each one contributing its unique capabilities to the collective operation of the god machine. This is why the betrayal aboard the Dies Irae was so devastating, so personal, so unforgivable. Titus Cassar and Jonah Aruken had shared the manifold together. They had touched each other's minds. They had fought together as parts of the same organism. And then Aruken murdered Cassar, not for ideological reasons, not because he believed in Horus's cause, but because he was ambitious and afraid, and he made a choice in the heat of a moment that extinguished a life that had been intertwined with his own in ways that most humans could never understand. The betrayal was not just a killing. It was the severing of a bond that had been forged in the fires of the manifold. And the scar it left was not just on the crew of the Dies Irae, but on the very concept of trust within the Collegia Titanica. Let me now walk you through what a typical combat engagement looks like from inside an Imperator, from the moment the order to engage is given to the moment the last shell casing hits the floor. But because I think this is the kind of immersive experience that brings the whole subject to life in a way that statistics and technical specifications cannot. The engagement begins long before the first shot is fired. The Titan's Auspex arrays detect the enemy at extreme range, often before the enemy is aware of the Titan's presence. Sensor data floods the manifold, and the Princeps begins to build a mental picture of the battlefield. Enemy positions are marked. Threat levels are assessed. Firing solutions are calculated. The machine spirit stirs, sensing the approach of combat, its eagerness manifesting as a subtle increase in reactor output and a sharpening of the sensor feeds. The Princeps issues orders to the Moderati through the neural link, thoughts translating into commands with the speed of electricity. The weapons Moderatus begins spinning up the Hellstorm cannon, the massive barrels rotating slowly at first, then faster and faster, the wind generated by their rotation audible even through the armored hull. The sensors Moderatus adjusts the Auspex arrays for maximum resolution, sweeping the battlefield for hidden threats. The navigation Moderatus plots the optimal approach vector, calculating the angles that will bring the maximum number of weapon systems to bear while minimizing the Titan's exposure to enemy fire. Down in the reactor chamber, the tech priests feel the increase in power demand as the weapon systems begin to charge. They adjust the containment fields, feeding more fuel into the reactor, chanting their prayers with increased urgency as the plasma burns hotter and the magnetic fields strain to contain it. Yet the servitors around them work faster, their lobotomized minds processing data streams that would overwhelm any unaugmented human brain. In the weapon bays, the gunnery crews prepare for action. Autoloaders are engaged, cycling rounds into position. Targeting cogitators are calibrated. The weapon bay monitors flicker to life, showing the view from the gun cameras mounted alongside the secondary weapon systems. The air in the weapon bays grows thick with the smell of propellant and machine oil as the guns warm up, ready to add their voices to the symphony of destruction. In the garrison quarters, the troops receive the order to stand to. Soldiers who were sleeping are shaken awake. Equipment is checked. Weapons are loaded. The garrison commander confers with the bridge via Vox, receiving deployment orders that specify where and when the troops will be disgorged onto the battlefield. The soldiers strap themselves into their drop harnesses and wait, listening to the increasing tempo of the Titan's footsteps and feeling the growing vibration of the weapon systems charging. On the lower decks, the tributae secure their tools and brace themselves. They know what is coming. The experienced ones, the veterans of dozens of engagements, move with calm efficiency, stowing loose objects and checking that emergency equipment is accessible. The newer ones, the ones who have only been aboard for a few campaigns, are visibly nervous, their eyes wide, their hands shaking slightly as they grip the handrails and wait for the violence to begin. And then the firing starts. The Hellstorm cannon speaks first, its barrels spinning at full speed, unleashing a torrent of directed energy that tears across the enemy formation. The sound inside the Titan is a sustained, bone-rattling roar that drowns out every other noise. The entire body of the machine trembles with the discharge. In the corridors, unsecured objects fly from shelves. In the mess halls, cups and plates slide across tables. In the berths, bedding shifts and blankets fall to the floor. And through it all, the rhythmic boom, boom, boom of the Titan's footsteps continues. The God machine advancing into the teeth of whatever opposition dares to stand before it. The plasma annihilator fires next, and this is a different kind of violence entirely. Where the Hellstorm cannon is sustained and continuous, the plasma annihilator is a single, cataclysmic pulse of energy that seems to suck all the air out of the Titan's interior for a split second before the discharge. The lights dim, the reactor screams, and then the blast, a sound and a fury that makes the Hellstorm cannon seem like a whisper, shakes the Titan from feet to cathedral spires. In the reactor chamber, the tech priests redouble their prayers, their voices rising in urgent binary as the containment fields struggle to cope with the sudden, massive drawdown of power. Outside, the battlefield is being remade. Enemy fortifications are reduced to rubble. Vehicle formations are scattered and burning. Infantry caught in the open are simply gone, vaporized or shredded by the concussive force of the weapon's discharge. But the Imperator walks through the destruction it has created with the calm inevitability of a natural disaster, its void shields shimmering as they deflect the increasingly desperate return fire of an enemy that is beginning to realize it cannot win this fight. Inside the Titan, the crew works with the smooth, practiced coordination of people who have done this many times before. The weapons moderatus shifts fire, directing the Hellstorm cannon onto new targets, while the plasma annihilator recharges. The sensors moderatus tracks enemy movements, flagging potential threats and updating the tactical picture in real time. The navigation moderatus adjusts the Titan's course, steering around terrain features that might impede its advance and positioning the machine to maximize its firepower. And the Princeps, at the center of it all, rides the manifold like a surfer riding a wave, processing the flood of data and emotion and machine spirit hunger with the calm focus of someone who has been doing this for decades. It is during these moments of combat that the Imperator truly comes alive, not just as a machine, but as a community. Every person aboard has a role to play, and every role matters. The tributary who keeps a coolant pipe functioning is as important in the immediate moment as the princeps who directs the weapons. The servitor who monitors a power conduit is as vital as the moderatus who fires the Hellstorm cannon. The entire Titan is a single organism, every cell working in concert toward a single goal. And when it functions as it should, when every system is operating at peak efficiency and every person is doing their job, the result is something that transcends the sum of its parts. The Imperator becomes not just a weapon, but an expression of what humanity can achieve when it puts aside its divisions and works together toward a common purpose. The irony, of course, is that this common purpose is destruction. The Imperator exists to kill, and it does so with an efficiency that is both awe-inspiring and deeply disturbing. But within that killing machine, in the spaces between the weapons and the armor and the reactor, human beings have built something that looks remarkably like a functioning society, complete with all the complexity and nuance and emotional depth that any society possesses. They have created a home in the belly of a god of war, and they defend that home with a passion that rivals any other loyalty in the Imperium. Or let me also speak about the transit between battles, because this is an aspect of life inside an Imperator that is often overlooked, but that actually occupies the majority of the crew's time. An Imperator Titan does not spend most of its existence in combat. It spends most of its existence being transported to the next combat zone, or waiting in reserve, or undergoing the extensive maintenance and repair that is required after each engagement. These periods of relative calm are when the crew's social dynamics are most visible, and when the human side of life aboard the God Machine becomes most apparent. During transit, the Titan is typically loaded onto an enormous transport vessel and secured for interstellar travel. The crew remains aboard during this process, as the Titan's internal systems continue to require monitoring and maintenance even when the machine is not walking. The reactor is reduced to minimal output, producing just enough power to maintain life support, internal lighting, and the basic monitoring systems that keep the tech priests informed about the state of the machine's subsystems. For the crew, transit time is a mixture of relief and restlessness. The tributary use it to catch up on deferred maintenance tasks, working their way through long lists of repairs and inspections that could not be completed during combat operations. The tech priests use it to perform the more elaborate and time-consuming rituals of machine maintenance, the deep blessings and comprehensive system diagnostics that require the Titan to be stationary and relatively quiet. The garrison troops train, are running drills in the corridors and practicing boarding defense scenarios in the Titan's internal spaces. And the princeps, disconnected from the mind impulse unit for the duration of the transit, endures. The withdrawal symptoms are at their worst during these periods, and the princeps must rely on their own willpower and whatever pharmaceutical support the tech priests can provide to get through the days and weeks without the link. Some princeps cope by immersing themselves in tactical planning, studying the intelligence reports on the next campaign, and developing strategies for the battles to come. Others retreat into meditation or prayer, seeking in the rituals of the cult mechanicus a pale reflection of the transcendence they experience in the manifold. And some, the most honest among them, simply suffer, counting the hours until they can be reconnected to their god. It is during transit that the interpersonal relationships aboard the Titan are forged and tested. Without the pressure of imminent combat, the crew has time to socialize, to talk, to develop the bonds of trust and affection that will sustain them when the shells start flying again. The mess hall becomes a gathering place, a communal space where tributae and junior tech priests and garrison soldiers share meals and stories and the kind of dark, gallows humor that is the universal language of people who live under constant threat of violent death. The Imperator, during these quiet periods, is almost peaceful. The reactor hums softly. The lights are steady. The corridors are filled with the quiet sounds of people going about their daily lives, the clank of tools, the murmur of conversation, the distant chanting of tech priests performing their rituals, the occasional burst of laughter from a group of garrison troops telling stories in their quarters. It is hard, in these moments, to remember that this is a machine designed for the sole purpose of destruction, that the peaceful corridors you are walking through will, in a matter of days or weeks, be shaking with the violence of weapon discharges and the thunderous footsteps of a god at war. But the war always comes. It always comes. The 41st millennium does not permit extended periods of peace, and the imperators are always needed somewhere, on some world where the enemies of the Imperium have grown too strong for lesser forces to contain. The order arrives, the transit ends, the transport vessel reaches its destination, and the Titan is unloaded, its reactor brought back to full power, its weapons recharged, its void shields reactivated, its machine spirit roused from its restless slumber and pointed at whatever enemy awaits. The crew returns to their stations. The princeps reconnects to the mind impulse unit, and for one glorious, terrible, addictive moment, they are a god again. The tributae pick up their tools. The garrison troops check their weapons. The tech priests begin their pre-battle rituals, filling the corridors with the sound of binary chanting and the smell of sacred incense. And the Imperator walks. Again. As it has always walked, as it will always walk, until the last reactor burns out, and the last machine spirit falls silent, and the last footstep echoes into the void. This cycle, this endless rhythm of combat and transit and maintenance and combat again, is the defining pattern of life inside an Imperator Titan. It is the heartbeat of the God machine, as constant and as inexorable as the reactor that powers it. And the people who live within that rhythm, who have adapted their entire existence to the demands of a machine that was ancient before they were born and will be ancient long after they are dead, have created something that is, in its own strange way, remarkable. They have created a home inside a weapon. They have built a community inside a god. They have found meaning and purpose, and even something resembling happiness inside a machine whose sole function is the infliction of apocalyptic violence upon the enemies of the Imperium. That is the final, enduring truth about life inside the largest Titan in Warhammer 40,000. It is not just about the weapons or the armor or the machine spirit or the reactor or the cathedral or the void shields or any of the other technological marvels that make the Imperator the most formidable ground-based weapon system in the galaxy. It is about the people, the hundreds of human souls who call this walking fortress their home, who have invested their lives and their loyalty and their labor in the service of something greater than themselves, and who have, in the process, created a microcosm of humanity that is as complex and as fascinating and as worthy of exploration as any corner of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The Collegia Titanica has been fielding these extraordinary machines since before the age of the Imperium, since the dark days of the Age of Strife when the first Titan legions, the Triad Ferrum Morgulus, and the Legio Tempestus, and the Legio Mortis, and the Legio Ignatum fought to protect Mars from the horrors that assailed it. In those earliest days, the Titans were weapons of desperation, built by a civilization on the brink of extinction to fight enemies that would have destroyed it utterly. 10,000 years later, they are still fighting. The enemies have changed. The Imperium has risen and nearly fallen and risen again. Entire civilizations have been born and died in the time since the first Imperator took its first step. But the God machines endure. They endure because they are built to endure. They endure because the Adeptus Mechanicus maintains them with a fanatical devotion that borders on obsession. They endure because the machine spirits that inhabit them are resilient beyond mortal comprehension, and ancient intelligences that have weathered 10 millennia of war without losing their essential nature. And they endure because the human beings who serve aboard them, from the princeps in the command throne to the tributae in the lowest maintenance tunnel, give them something that no amount of engineering or cybernetic enhancement or sacred ritual can provide. They give them purpose. They give them meaning. They give them the one thing that even a god cannot create for itself. They give them life. There is one more aspect of the Imperator's existence that I want to paint for you before we reach the end of our journey, and that is the relationship between the Imperator and the wider Titan Legion to which it belongs. Because an Imperator does not walk alone. It walks as the heart of a battle group, the centerpiece of a formation that typically includes multiple Warlord-class Battle Titans, Reaver-class Battle Titans, and Warhound-class Scout Titans, all working together under the strategic direction of the Legion's Grand Master, who often commands from aboard the Imperator itself. This means that the Imperator is not just a weapon, it is a flagship. It is the vessel from which an entire military formation is coordinated, the mobile headquarters from which the Grand Master issues orders to every Titan and every supporting force in the battle group. The communication systems aboard an Imperator are therefore among the most sophisticated of any ground-based platform in the Imperium, capable of maintaining simultaneous contact with dozens of friendly units across a battlefield that might span hundreds of kilometers. Yet the relationship between the Imperator and the smaller Titans in its battle group is, in some ways, analogous to the relationship between a capital ship and its escort vessels in a naval fleet. The Warhounds range ahead, scouting enemy positions and feeding targeting data back to the main formation. The Reavers provide close support, engaging enemy forces that threaten the Imperator's flanks or rear. The Warlords form the main battle line, adding their considerable firepower to the Imperator's own devastating arsenal. And the Imperator itself anchors the entire formation, its presence on the battlefield, a rallying point for friendly forces, and a source of existential dread for the enemy. Inside the Imperator, during a full Legion deployment, the strategic planning chamber becomes the busiest and most important space aboard the machine, as apart from the command bridge itself. Officers from the various supporting formations feed information into the Imperator's communication systems, and the Grand Master's staff processes this information and translates it into orders that are then distributed to every unit in the battle group. The atmosphere is tense, focused, and incredibly complex, as multiple streams of information converge on a single point and must be synthesized into a coherent operational picture in real time. The crew of the Imperator takes a particular pride in this role. They are not just operating a single Titan. They are enabling the entire Legion to function as a coordinated fighting force. The Vox operators who maintain the communication links, the logisticians who track ammunition and fuel supplies across the battle group, As the data analysts who process the feeds from dozens of Auspex arrays and compile them into a single tactical display, all of these people contribute to a capability that extends far beyond the walls of their own machine. They are the nerve center of a military formation that can conquer worlds, and they know it. This also means that the Imperator's crew has a broader awareness of the war than the crews of smaller titans. A Warhound crew experiences battle as a close, personal, immediate thing, their senses filled with the sights and sounds and shocks of close-range combat. An Imperator crew experiences battle on a strategic level, watching the movements of entire armies across the tactical display, tracking the progress of engagements that are happening kilometers away, and understanding the big picture in a way that most ground forces never can. This perspective can be both empowering and isolating. The crew can see everything, but they are separated from it by layers of armor and distance, watching the war unfold through screens and data feeds, while the Titan walks steadily forward through the heart of it all, a calm eye in the center of a storm of violence. The Imperial Knights that often accompany Titan legions into battle add another dimension to this formation. These smaller war machines, piloted by nobles from ancient knight houses, serve as a bridge between the Titans and the infantry forces on the ground, engaging enemy vehicles and armor so that the Titans can focus on the heaviest targets. From inside the Imperator, the knights are visible as small, in nimble shapes, darting across the battlefield below, their thermal lances and rapid-fire battle cannons flickering as they engage the enemy at ranges that the Titan's massive weapons would consider point-blank. The relationship between the Titan crews and the Knight pilots is one of mutual respect, if not always warmth. The Titan crews see the Knights as brave but reckless, while the Knight pilots see the Titan crews as impossibly arrogant, and both are probably right. The Secutarii, who escort the Imperator on foot, are the closest human allies the Titan has on the battlefield. These specialist warriors of the Collegia Titanica are trained to fight in the unique environment created by a walking Titan, a battle space where the ground shakes constantly, where the noise is deafening, where the void shields can cause disorientation, and where the enemy is often driven to irrational behavior by sheer terror. The Secutarii carry specialized weapons and wear adapted armor that allows them to operate in this environment, and they maintain a protective screen around the Titan's legs, intercepting infantry threats before they can reach the hull. From inside the Imperator, the Secutarii are visible on the external monitors as small figures moving in formation around the Titan's massive feet, their movements synchronized with the machine's stride, dodging the impact zones of each footfall with the practiced ease of warriors who have spent their entire careers fighting in the shadow of a god. The Titan's crew watches over them through the external cameras and the sensor feeds, and there is a bond between the two groups that is forged in the shared experience of walking to war together. The crew inside the god and the warriors outside it, each depending on the other for survival. When a Secutarii falls, the crew notices. On the lower decks, where the external monitors show the ground around the Titan's feet in real time, the Tributi who watch those screens sometimes develop personal connections to the Secutarii they see every day, learning to recognize individual warriors by their armor markings or their movement patterns. When one of those warriors goes down, cut apart by enemy fire or crushed by collapsing terrain, the Tributi feel the loss in a way that surprises them, a grief for someone they never spoke to but watched, day after day, through a screen, walking faithfully in the footprints of a god. And this is the final piece of the puzzle, the last detail that completes the picture of life inside the largest Titan in Warhammer 40,000. It is the detail of connection, human connection, the bonds that form between people who share a purpose and a home, even when that home is a weapon of mass destruction, and that purpose is the annihilation of the enemies of the Imperium. These bonds are what make the Imperator more than just a machine. They are what give it life. Not the artificial life of the machine's spirit, powerful and ancient though it may be, but the warm, messy, complicated life of human beings who laugh and grieve and hope and fear and love, all inside the armored body of a walking god. The Imperium is a cruel place. It grinds its people down. It uses them up and throws them away. It demands everything and gives little in return. But inside the Imperator, in the narrow corridors and the swaying cathedral and the humming reactor chamber and the cramped berths of the lower decks, something survives that the Imperium cannot quite extinguish. Call it humanity, call it community, call it the stubborn, inexplicable refusal of human beings to stop caring about each other, even in the worst circumstances imaginable. The Imperator walks, the earth shakes, the galaxy burns, and inside the god, someone puts the kettle on, and someone else tells a joke, and someone else checks a pressure gauge and nods because the reading is good, and the machine keeps walking, and the people inside it keep living, and the war goes on, and the war goes on, and the war goes on. But they endure, together, inside a god, and that, in the end, is everything. Let us now talk about some of the Imperator Titans that have left their mark on the history of the galaxy, because these machines are not interchangeable. Each one has a name, a personality, a history, and a legacy. To the Adeptus Mechanicus, the loss of an Imperator is mourned with the same grief and ceremony as the death of a great hero, more even, because heroes can be replaced, Imperators cannot. The Dies Irae, the Day of Wrath. This is, without question, the most infamous Imperator Titan in all of Warhammer 40,000. An engine of the Legio Mortis, the Death's Head Legion, the Dies Irae served with the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet during the Great Crusade, walking in the shadow of the Warmaster Horus himself. When the Horus heresy tore the Imperium apart, the Dies Irae betrayed the Emperor along with the rest of its legion, and it was the Dies Irae that fired upon the loyalist Death Guard Space Marines at Istvan III, an act of treachery committed while one of its own moderati, Titus Cassar, tried desperately to stop it and was murdered by his own crewmate for his trouble. But the Dies Irae's greatest moment of infamy came during the Siege of Terra, at the very climax of the heresy, when the forces of chaos assaulted the Imperial Palace itself. The Dies Irae was the first traitor titan to breach the walls of the Imperial Palace, smashing through defenses that had been built to withstand anything the galaxy could throw at them, opening a gap through which the Chaos Space Marines and their demon allies poured like a flood through a broken dam. This single act earned the Dies Irae a place in the annals of infamy that no amount of time could erase, and the loyalist Titan legions swore that the destruction of the Dies Irae would be worth the cost of an entire battle group of Titans. Such was the hatred it inspired. The Dies Irae survived for 10,000 years after the heresy, retreating into the Eye of Terror with the rest of the traitor legions, its hull warped and mutated by millennia of exposure to the energies of the warp. When it emerged again during the siege of Hydra Caudatus in 999 M41, it was a twisted, barely recognizable version of the machine it had once been. Chaos had given it a tail tipped with a spiked wrecking ball, and its armor was scarred and deformed by the touch of demonic forces. It finally met its end when a loyalist warlord titan detonated its own plasma reactor at point-blank range, severely damaging the Dies Irae. And a subsequent assault by more loyalist titans finished the job. The most infamous titan in history died, as it had lived, in violence and fire and the fury of gods at war. During the Great Crusade era, the Dies Irae was described as standing approximately 43 meters tall, though this was during a period when the imperial truth held sway, and the cathedral structure that characterizes most imperators in the 41st millennium was not present. The Dies Irae of that era was a weapon of the secular Imperium, unburdened by the religious architecture that would later be added to Emperor Titans when the imperial cult and the cult Mechanicus reached their uncomfortable accommodation. The Casus Belli. If the Dies Irae represents the darkest aspects of the Imperator's legacy, then the Casus Belli represents something closer to its original purpose. An Imperator of the Legio Metallica, the Iron Skulls, the Casus Belli, has been in service for over 10,000 years, walking the battlefields of the galaxy in defense of the Imperium since the earliest days of the Mechanicus's existence. It is the Titan we know the most about in terms of internal life and crew dynamics, thanks to Gav Thorpe's novel, and it is through the Casus Belli that we get our most detailed picture of what it actually means to live inside one of these machines. The Casus Belli was the lead engine of Battle Group Casus Belli, the Legio Metallica's most substantial off-world force during the dark days of the Noctis Eterna, the period of galactic darkness that followed the opening of the Great Rift. Operating at well over demi-legio strength and supported by 6 warlords, 4 reavers, 3 warhounds, and a pair of warrior-class titans, this battle group was tasked with the reclamation of the Adeptus Mechanicus world of Nicomedua, which had turned against the Imperium. During the subjugation of Nicomedua, the Casus Belli faced not only external enemies, tainted war engines, traitor legionnaires, armies of cultists, but also an enemy within. A traitor had infiltrated the Titan's crew, threatening to subvert the god machine from the inside. It was the young tributary Gelsa Vin Giant, a common maintenance worker, who found herself caught up in this conspiracy, and her story became the story of the Casus Belli itself, a tale of loyalty and treachery and the stubborn human refusal to let a god die on their watch. The Casus Belli carried a standard Imperator armament of a plasma annihilator and hellstorm cannon as its primary weapons, and it was equipped with the full complement of secondary systems, void shields, and garrison forces that made it a self-contained military force in its own right. But what made the Casus Belli special, what set it apart from other Imperators, was the depth of its machine spirit's connection to its crew. This was a Titan that had known thousands of crew members over its 10 millennia of service, and the machine spirit had grown and evolved with each generation, becoming something that was, in a very real sense, the accumulated memory of everyone who had ever served aboard it. The Exemplis, an Imperator of the Legio Ignatum, the Fire Wasps. The Exemplis was one of the last remaining Imperators in service with one of the oldest and most honored Titan legions in the Collegia Titanica. Yet the Legio Ignatum traces its history back to the Age of Strife, when it was one of the original 3 Titan legions, the Triad Ferrum Morgulus, that fought to protect Mars from the horrors of that dark age. The Exemplis was deployed during the invasion of Tannacreg, and in the lore, its arrival on the battlefield is described in terms that make it clear just how overwhelming the presence of an Imperator is. The earth shuddered with each step. It rose out of the gloom like a colossus of the ancients, a towering behemoth of awesome power. The mountains shook to their foundations as thousands of tons of metal slammed into the hard, salt-packed earth with each titanic step. Those legs alone were mighty bastion fortresses, complete with battle cannon batteries and crenellated walls from which soldiers could pour fire into the foe. Yes, this is what it looks like from the outside when an Imperator walks. From the inside, the experience is no less overwhelming, but it is filtered through the familiar context of daily life. The crew does not see the mountains shaking. They feel the rhythmic vibration through the soles of their boots. They hear the distant crump of the battle cannons in the legs. They see the targeting data scrolling across their screens, the sensor feeds showing the enemy formations scattering before them. They are inside the Colossus, and from inside, the Colossus is home. The Abominatus, despoiler of worlds. If the Dies Irae was the most infamous Imperator, the Abominatus is the most terrifying. A Chaos Imperator of the Legio Magna, the Abominatus is the hellish union of an Imperator-class Titan and a greater demon of Khorne. It is not merely a corrupted machine, it is a demon engine on a scale that defies comprehension, a walking fortress possessed by one of the most powerful entities in the warp, driven by an unquenchable bloodlust and an eternal hunger for destruction. When the Abominatus walks, the ground shakes with the weight of something that exists partially in reality and partially in the nightmare realm of the warp. Flames and gunsmoke flicker from every casement and embrasure in its massive body, and its soul, if it can be said to have one, burns with the unquenchable fire of a demon's hatred. The Abominatus carries the standard Imperator armament, a plasma annihilator and hellstorm cannon, along with its secondary batteries. But the weapons on its main fighting platform have been twisted and corrupted by the forces of chaos into something that even the most experienced Imperial commanders have difficulty classifying. The interior of the Abominatus is something that no Imperial soldier has ever seen and survived to describe, but the lore gives us enough hints to paint a deeply disturbing picture. The walls would be covered with the sigils of Khorne, the blood god, pulsing and writhing with demonic energy. The corridors would be slick with blood, and something worse, the residue of 10 millennia of demonic possession slowly transforming the interior of the machine from cold metal into something that is, in a very real sense, alive. The crew, if any remain, would be long since consumed or corrupted, yet their minds and bodies twisted beyond recognition by their proximity to a greater demon of the blood god. The Abominatus is a reminder that the Imperator Titan, for all its power and all its glory, is not immune to the corrupting influence of chaos. The same machine spirit that makes the Titan so formidable also makes it vulnerable. A machine spirit as powerful and as ancient as that of an Imperator is a prize beyond measure for the dark entities of the warp. If they can breach the Titan's defenses, if they can subvert its machine spirit and corrupt its crew, they can transform the greatest weapon in the Imperium's arsenal into the greatest weapon in the arsenal of chaos. There have been other famous Imperators throughout the history of the Imperium, the Magnificum Incendius of the Legio Ignatum, which served as part of Terra's defenses during the Horus Heresy, standing guard over the Imperial Palace itself, while the forces of chaos raged outside its walls. The Aquila Ignis, also of the Legio Mortis, which was destroyed on Mars during the Schism of Mars, when the Forge World tore itself apart in civil war, its wreckage so vast that its Hellstorm cannon was later found lying on its side on the planet Cronus, a monument to the scale of destruction that the heresy wrought, with a trench large enough to move an armored company through, carved into the earth in front of the cannon from its final firing. The Imperius Cathedra of the Legio Victorum, which was actually still under construction when the Horus Heresy broke out, and was completed even as the fighting raged around it, going directly from the forge to the battlefield with its paint still drying and its systems still being calibrated. Each of these machines has its own story, its own crew, its own relationship with the machine spirit that inhabits it. And each one represents a commitment of resources so vast that the loss of any single Imperator is felt throughout the entire Collegia Titanica, a wound that can take centuries to heal, if it can be healed at all. Let us talk now about what happens when a god dies. The destruction of an Imperator Titan is, depending on your perspective, either the most terrible or the most awe-inspiring event that can occur on a battlefield. Because an Imperator does not die quietly. It does not simply shut down and topple over like a building whose foundations have been undermined. When an Imperator's critical systems are breached, when the reactor containment fails, or the machine spirit is overwhelmed, or the structural integrity of the chassis is compromised beyond recovery, the result is a cataclysm. The reactor detonation is the most common cause of catastrophic Imperator destruction, and we have already discussed the scale of that event. A white-hot supernova visible from orbit, a shockwave that flattens everything within kilometers, a blast that can vaporize entire regiments and turn the landscape itself into a crater of fused glass and pulverized rock. But there is more to the death of an Imperator than the physical destruction. There is the machine spirit. When a Titan dies, the machine spirit dies with it, or at the very least. Here, the fragment of consciousness that inhabited the physical structure of the Titan is destroyed. An intelligence that has been accumulating knowledge, battle data, and something that might be called personality for 10,000 years simply ceases to exist. The tech priests of the Mechanicus believe that the machine spirit returns to the Omnissiah, rejoining the infinite consciousness of the machine god from which it originally emerged. Whether this is literally true or simply a comforting fiction is a question that no one in the 41st millennium is equipped to answer. But the grief felt by the surviving members of the Titan's crew, by the tech priests who tended it, and the tributae who lived inside it, and the princeps who shared its consciousness, is as real as any grief felt for the death of a loved one. The death of the princeps is often simultaneous with the death of the Titan, the psychic shock of the machine spirit's destruction traveling through the mind impulse unit and annihilating the princeps' consciousness before they have time to realize what is happening. In some cases, the emergency cutoffs activate in time, severing the neural link and sparing the princeps from death, but subjecting them to a trauma so severe that many never recover. A princeps who has been linked to a Titan for decades, who has shared its consciousness and felt its emotions and experienced the world through its senses, does not simply shrug off the severing of that connection. The loss is existential. It is like having a piece of your identity torn away, like losing not just a limb or a sense, but a fundamental aspect of what makes you who you are. As surviving princeps are sometimes reassigned to new Titans, but the process is difficult and dangerous. The machine spirit of the new Titan is not the machine spirit of the old one. It has its own personality, its own history, its own expectations of what a princeps should be. The princeps must earn its trust all over again, must submit to the hazing and testing, and sometimes outright hostility of a machine intelligence that does not yet know or accept them. Some princeps never manage to bond with a new Titan and spend the rest of their lives in a state of perpetual withdrawal, haunted by the ghost of the machine they once commanded. For the rest of the crew, the death of their Titan means the end of their world, quite literally. They lose their home, their purpose, and their community all in the same instant. Surviving tributae, if there are any, must be reassigned to other duties or other machines. Tech priests who have spent decades learning the specific quirks and requirements of their Titan's systems must start over with a new machine. Garrison troops who have lived and trained inside the Titan for months or years must adapt to a completely different tactical environment. The loss is not merely personal, it is strategic. The Imperium cannot build new imperators. The knowledge has been lost. Every imperator that falls in battle is one fewer imperator defending the Imperium, and it will never be replaced. The total number of imperators in service has been declining for millennia, a slow attrition that cannot be reversed, and every tech priest in the Collegia Titanica knows this. They fight to preserve their god machines with a desperation that goes beyond professional obligation or even religious duty. They fight because they know that if they fail, if they allow another imperator to die, they have lost something that can never be recovered, a piece of the Imperium's heritage and a fraction of its power that will be gone forever. And so the maintenance never stops. The rituals are never skipped. The tributae continue to tighten bolts and replace cabling and carry heavy components through narrow corridors. The tech priests continue to chant their binary prayers and apply their sacred oils. The servitors continue to monitor their readouts and adjust their containment fields. And the machine spirit continues to hum, ancient and vast and hungry, waiting for the next battle, or waiting to walk once more across the fields of war and shake the earth with the footsteps of a god. This brings us to a question that I think is worth considering, not because it has a definitive answer, but because it gets to the heart of what the Imperator Titan represents in the broader context of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. What does it mean to live inside a god? The people who crew an Imperator Titan do not live normal lives by any definition of the word. They live inside a machine that is worshipped as a divine entity by the religious hierarchy to which most of them belong. They eat and sleep and work and sometimes die inside its body. They depend on it for air, for warmth, for protection from the vacuum of space during transit and from the weapons of the enemy during combat. their identities become bound up with it. Man, a tributary who has served aboard the same imperator for 20 years does not think of themselves as a citizen of whatever world they were born on. They think of themselves as a member of the Titan's crew, a cell in the body of the god, and their loyalty is to the machine first and the Imperium second. This is both the strength and the tragedy of the Imperator. Its strength because it creates a crew whose dedication borders on the fanatical. People who will work themselves to exhaustion and fight to the death to protect their machine, because they genuinely love it in a way that transcends rational calculation. Its tragedy because it means that the destruction of the Titan is not merely a military loss, but a human one, the obliteration of a community and a way of life. It's the end of something that meant everything to the people who lived inside it. In the 41st millennium, this is not unusual. The entire Imperium operates on a similar principle, binding its citizens to institutions and hierarchies so completely that the institutions become indistinguishable from the people who serve them. But the Imperator Titan takes this principle to its logical extreme. It is the smallest possible unit of imperial society, a complete, self-contained world with its own hierarchy, its own culture, its own theology, and its own relationship with the divine, all packed into a body that can walk and fight and die. The scale of these machines and the depth of the lives lived within them reminds us that the Imperium of man is not merely a political entity or a military alliance. It is a civilization, ancient and vast and deeply, profoundly strange, that has adapted to the conditions of perpetual warfare in ways that would be unrecognizable to any modern observer. The Imperator Titan is one of those adaptations. It is a cathedral and a fortress and a weapon and a home, all in one, and the people who live inside it have created a form of human community that could exist nowhere else, in no other context, under no other circumstances. A community built around the heartbeat of a plasma reactor and the footsteps of a god. There is something deeply moving about that, beneath all the grim dark nihilism and the galaxy-spanning warfare and the endless, relentless cruelty of the Imperium's institutions. There are people inside these machines, in people who form bonds and make friends and tell jokes and share meals and fall asleep to the rhythm of footsteps that shake the earth. People who look out through armored viewports at alien skies and feel something that, despite everything, might still be called wonder. People who, against all odds and in defiance of a universe that seems determined to strip away every shred of humanity from every living soul, continue to be human. That is what life is like inside the largest Titan in Warhammer 40,000. It is vast and terrifying and strange and beautiful and awful and magnificent, all at once, all mixed together, inseparable and irreducible, like everything else in this extraordinary universe that we gather around to explore and celebrate and lose ourselves in. The Imperator walks, the earth shakes, the guns speak their thunder. And somewhere inside, in a narrow corridor on the lower decks, a tributary who has never seen the Princeps' face and never will reaches out and pats the wall as they walk to their shift. A small gesture of affection for the god that is their home, and the god, ancient and vast and filled with the memories of 10,000 years, feels it. Or perhaps it does not. Perhaps the machine spirit is too vast and too alien to notice the touch of a single hand on a single section of hull. But the tributary believes it does. And in the Imperium of man, belief has a power all its own. And that is enough. If you enjoyed this journey inside the body of a god, if you found yourself wondering what it would be like to hear the footsteps shake the floor beneath your feet, or to see alien starlight filtered through 10,000-year-old stained glass, I would love to have you join us for more explorations of this incredible universe. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Your support means everything, and it helps us continue to dive deeper and deeper into the dark corners of the 41st millennium. Until next time, keep the faith, serve the machine spirit well, And remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But inside the body of a god, there is also something else. There is home. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next one.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.